A woman stood in falling snow with nothing but a wooden spoon, staring at the mountain that would either save her or bury her forever. Evelyn Mercer had lost everything: her husband to death, her home to debt, her dignity to a town that smiled while it destroyed her. Now the Missouri Valley wanted her to beg, to disappear, to become invisible like all the other widows who faded into nothing. But Evelyn refused to vanish. So she walked into the frozen frontier wilderness carrying only hunger, rage, and one unshakable truth. She would survive, even if the entire world said she couldn't. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this journey travels. The morning Evelyn Mercer's world ended began like any other morning in the Missouri Valley: quiet, cold, and merciless. She woke before dawn in the small cabin she'd shared with Thomas for 11 years. The same cabin where they'd laughed through hard winters, where they'd planned a future that felt solid as the oak beams overhead. The fire had died sometime in the night. Her breath clouded in the darkness. She reached across the bed out of habit, forgetting for one heartbreaking moment that Thomas had been dead for 3 months. The empty space beside her felt colder than the room. Evelyn sat up slowly, her joints stiff from sleeping on the thin mattress they'd never had money to replace. She was 42 years old, broad-shouldered, and heavy in a way the Valley women whispered about when they thought she couldn't hear. Her hands were thick from years of work. Her face was plain, weathered by sun and worry. She'd never been the kind of woman men wrote poems about. Thomas hadn't cared. He'd loved her anyway. But Thomas was gone now, buried under frozen ground on the hill behind the church, and Evelyn had learned a bitter truth. A widow's worth in the Missouri Valley was measured only by what she could offer men who were still breathing. She dressed in the dark, pulling on the same worn dress she'd worn for 2 years, the fabric thin at the elbows and patched at the hem. Then she walked outside into the brittle November cold. The valley stretched before her in shades of gray and brown: barren fields, skeletal trees, smoke rising from distant chimneys. Beyond the valley, the frontier mountains stood like a wall of stone and ice, vast and indifferent. Most people feared those mountains. Evelyn had always found them beautiful. She was halfway to the well when she saw the men. 3 of them stood near her fence, talking in low voices. She recognized them immediately: Samuel Grant, the bank agent; Wendell Foss, who owned the general store; and Clayton Marks, a land speculator who smiled too much and never meant it. Evelyn's stomach tightened. "Mrs. Mercer," Samuel called out, tipping his hat with false courtesy. "We need to speak with you." She stopped 10 feet away, arms crossed over her chest. "About what?" Samuel cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable in the way men do when they're about to ruin someone's life and want credit for feeling bad about it. "It's about the property, ma'am. Your late husband. Well, it seems Thomas took out a loan against this cabin 2 years ago. A substantial loan." The words hit her like a fist to the chest. "That's a lie." "I'm afraid it's documented, Mrs. Mercer." Samuel pulled papers from his coat pocket. He borrowed $300 from the bank. The debt was due 6 months ago. With interest, you now owe $420. Evelyn's vision blurred at the edges. $420. She didn't have $4. "Thomas never told me about any loan," she said, her voice shaking. "Perhaps he didn't want to worry you," Wendell offered, though his eyes said he didn't believe it mattered either way. Clayton Marks stepped forward, his smile sharp as a knife. "Now, Mrs. Mercer, we understand this is difficult, but the bank needs to settle accounts. Since you can't pay the debt, we'll need to take possession of the property." "This is my home." "It was your home," Clayton corrected gently. "As of this morning, it belongs to the bank. We're giving you until sunset to gather your personal belongings. Anything that was purchased with loan money stays with the property." Evelyn looked at the cabin, the only home she'd known for over a decade, the place where she'd buried a stillborn daughter 9 years ago, where she'd nursed Thomas through his final fever, where every wall held memories that would die if she left. "I'll find the money," she said desperately. "Give me time." Samuel shook his head. "We've been patient, Mrs. Mercer. The debt should have been settled months ago." "How can I settle a debt I didn't know existed?" "Ignorance of a contract doesn't nullify it," Clayton said, still smiling. "You have until sunset." They left her standing in the cold. Evelyn spent the next 8 hours trying to find help. She went to the church first, where Reverend Michaels listened with sympathetic eyes and empty hands. "I wish I could assist you, Mrs. Mercer, but the church fund is already stretched thin. Perhaps you could stay with family." "I don't have family." "Friends, then?" She'd thought she had friends. She learned otherwise that day. Margaret Foster, who'd borrowed Evelyn's preserves all summer, suddenly remembered urgent business when Evelyn knocked on her door. "I'm so sorry, dear, but we simply don't have room. You understand?" Sarah Clemens was more direct. "Evelyn, you're a sweet woman, but my husband won't allow it. He says harboring you would be seen as taking sides against the bank, and we can't afford that kind of trouble." Even Doc Morrison, who'd eaten Evelyn's cooking at every community gathering for years, could only offer regret. "Times are hard, Evelyn. Everyone's barely scraping by. I wish things were different." By mid-afternoon, Evelyn understood the truth. The valley had already decided her fate. She was a woman alone, past her prime, with no money and no protector. In the eyes of the community, she'd become invisible the moment Thomas died. She returned to the cabin as the sun began its descent. The men had been efficient. They'd already posted a notice on the door declaring the property under bank possession. Inside, everything looked the same. The table Thomas had built, the rocking chair where she'd mended clothes on quiet evenings, the iron stove that had cooked 10,000 meals. None of it belonged to her anymore. Evelyn stood in the center of the room and tried to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. She'd cried herself empty in the 3 months since Thomas died. All that remained now was a cold, stubborn anger. She looked around the cabin, trying to decide what to take. The bank had said personal belongings only, but what did that even mean? The quilts were sewn from fabric Thomas bought. The dishes were purchased with his wages. Even the clothes on her back had been paid for with money he'd earned. In the end, she took almost nothing. A small bundle of clothes, a cracked cooking pot Thomas had given her on their wedding day, an old wooden spoon worn smooth by years of use. That was all. She left the cabin just as the sun touched the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of fire and blood. Behind her, Samuel Grant and Clayton Marks were already discussing what to do with the property. Ahead of her, the valley stretched into darkness, offering nothing but cold indifference. Evelyn turned west, toward the mountains, and started walking. What? The frontier in 1870 was not kind to women traveling alone. Evelyn learned this within the first 3 days. She followed the rough wagon road that led from the Missouri Valley into the high country, sleeping in dense pine groves and drinking from ice-cold streams. The few travelers she encountered, trappers, prospectors, freight haulers, looked at her with suspicion or pity, sometimes both. "You lost, ma'am?" a freight hauler asked on the second day, pulling his wagon alongside her. "No," Evelyn said simply. "Where are you headed?" "West." The man frowned. "West is a direction, not a destination. Winter's coming hard this year. You need shelter, a town, something." "I'll find something." The hauler studied her for a long moment, then shrugged. "Suit yourself, but if you're smart, you'll turn back before the snow comes. These mountains eat people who don't respect them." He drove on, leaving Evelyn alone on the empty road. She walked for 12 hours that day, her feet blistering inside worn boots, her shoulders aching from the weight of her small pack. By nightfall, she'd reached a settlement called Timber Fork, a rough collection of log buildings clustered around a sawmill. The settlement had one boarding house. Evelyn approached the proprietor, a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Dalton, and asked about a room. $2 a night, Mrs. Dalton said without looking up from her ledger. "Payment in advance." "I don't have $2, Evelyn admitted, "but I can work. I'm a good cook. I can clean, mend, whatever you need." Mrs. Dalton finally looked at her, a long, assessing gaze that started at Evelyn's worn boots and traveled up to her wind-burned face. "We don't need help," she said flatly. "Please, I just need a place to sleep for one night." "Then you need $2. Evelyn felt the familiar sting of dismissal. "I'm willing to work hard. I won't cause trouble." Mrs. Dalton's expression hardened. "Listen, woman, I don't know what you're running from, and I don't care. This is a working settlement. We don't have room for charity cases. Move along." Evelyn stood there for one more moment, holding on to the last shred of her dignity, then turned and walked back into the cold. She slept that night under a pine tree at the edge of the settlement, wrapped in both her dresses for warmth shivering until dawn. The next town was worse. The settlement was called Ridge Gap, and it existed primarily to service miners working claims in the surrounding hills. The streets were mud and planks. The buildings leaned at dangerous angles. The men outnumbered women 20 to 1. Evelyn walked into the largest saloon, not to drink, but because she knew saloons needed cooks. The moment she entered, every conversation stopped. 30 pairs of eyes turned toward her. Men with hard faces and harder hands. Men who saw a woman alone and made immediate assumptions. "Well, well," drawled a bearded man near the bar. "What do we have here?" Evelyn forced herself to stand straight. "I'm looking for work. Cooking, cleaning, anything honest." Laughter rippled through the room. "Honest work," someone repeated mockingly. "That's a good one." The bartender, a heavy-set man with scarred knuckles, studied her with cold amusement. "We already got a cook, lady, and even if we didn't, we wouldn't hire you." "Why not?" "Look at yourself," he said bluntly. "You're too old, too big, and too desperate. Men don't want to look at that while they're trying to enjoy a meal." The words landed like stones. Evelyn felt her face flush hot despite the room's cold. "I'm a good cook," she said quietly. "I'm sure you are, honey," the bearded man said, grinning. "But around here, women who can't get regular work usually find other arrangements. Maybe you should consider that." More laughter. Cruel, knowing laughter. Evelyn turned and walked out before the tears could start. She made it 2 more days before hunger truly broke her. The road had climbed higher into the mountains now, the air thin and brutally cold. Snow dusted the peaks above. Evelyn's supplies, 2 pieces of stale bread and a handful of dried beans, had run out that morning. By afternoon, her legs trembled with every step. Her vision swam. She'd gone without real food for nearly a week, and her body was starting to fail. She collapsed beside the road near dusk, sitting heavily on a fallen log, her cracked cooking pot clutched in both hands like a talisman. This was how she would die, she realized. Not dramatically, not nobly. She would simply sit down one day and not get back up. The mountains would bury her under snow, and no one would ever know she'd existed. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it made her angry. "No," Evelyn said out loud, her voice hoarse and raw. "No, I won't." She forced herself to stand, swaying with exhaustion, and kept walking. An hour later, she smelled smoke. The settlement appeared around a bend in the road like a mirage, a cluster of rough buildings built against the mountainside, smoke rising from a dozen chimneys. A weathered sign at the edge of town read, "Black Hollow." Evelyn stumbled forward on numb legs. The settlement's main street was empty except for a few men loading supplies onto a wagon. They glanced at her briefly, then returned to their work without interest. She found what passed for a general store, a small log building with barrels of flour and salt stacked outside. Inside, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles stood behind a counter. "Help you?" he asked without enthusiasm. "I need food," Evelyn said. "I don't have money, but I can work," the man sighed. "Lady, I hear that twice a week. I'm running a business, not a charity." "Please," the word came out broken. "Anything. I'll scrub floors, haul freight, anything." I'm starving," Evelyn interrupted, and the raw honesty in her voice made the shopkeeper pause. He studied her for a long moment, then reached under the counter and pulled out a small burlap sack. "Beans," he said, setting it on the counter. "About 2 pounds, and a piece of salt pork." Evelyn stared at the sack, afraid to hope. "I can't pay you." "Didn't ask you to." He pushed the sack toward her. "My wife died 2 years ago. Nobody helped her when she needed it either, so take the food and get out of my store before I change my mind." Evelyn took the sack with shaking hands. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just try to survive, all right? One less dead woman in these mountains." She left quickly, before emotion could choke her. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the settlement in long shadows. Evelyn found an empty space between 2 buildings, gathered scraps of wood, and started a fire with trembling fingers. She filled her cracked cooking pot with water from a nearby barrel, added the beans and a chunk of salt pork, and set the pot over the flames. As the water began to heat, the smell of cooking food rose into the cold evening air. Within minutes, men began to appear. They came slowly at first, one miner pausing on his way home, Then another, then three more. They didn't approach the fire. They simply stood in the shadows, drawn by the smell like wolves to prey. Evelyn ignored them, stirring her pot with the old wooden spoon. The beans simmered. The salt pork released its fat into the water. The smell grew richer, more complex. The scent of comfort, of warmth, of food made with care instead of mere survival. By the time the beans were ready, nearly 20 men had gathered. Evelyn looked up at them, hard-faced frontier men with empty eyes and hungry expressions. "I don't have enough to share," she said quietly. No one moved. "I'm sorry, this is all I have." An old man stepped forward from the crowd, tall and lean, with a gray beard and eyes that had seen too much. He stared at Evelyn's pot for a long moment, then looked at her face. "When's the last time you ate, woman?" 6 days ago. Bread." The old man nodded slowly. "And before that?" "I don't remember." He glanced at the watching men, then back at Evelyn. "My name's Cade. I'm a trail scout. Been crossing these mountains for 40 years. He gestured at the pot. "That smell. That's not just beans and pork. That's skill. That's someone who knows what they're doing." Evelyn said nothing. "These men," Cade continued, "they've been eating burnt meat and hard biscuits for months. Half of them don't even remember what real cooking tastes like." He paused. "You looking for work?" "I've been looking for work for 2 weeks," Evelyn said bitterly. "Nobody wants me." "That's because you've been asking the wrong people." Cade pulled a piece of paper from his coat pocket and a stub of pencil. He scribbled something quickly, then handed it to her. "There's a ranch about 15 miles north of here, place called Iron Ridge. Big cattle operation, 20 hands, run by a man named Rowan Vale." Evelyn stared at the paper. "I don't know anything about ranching. They don't need a rancher, they need a cook." Cade's expression grew serious. "Fair warning. Iron Ridge is hard country. The ranch is isolated, the work is brutal, and Vale himself is a difficult man. Lost his wife 5 years back in a fire. Hasn't been the same since. The whole place feels like it's waiting to die." "Then why would you send me there?" Cade looked at her pot again, then met her eyes. "Because I just watched you make something beautiful out of beans and scrap pork while you're half-starved yourself. That tells me you're not just a cook. You're someone who refuses to give up, even when the world says you should." He nodded toward the mountains. "Iron Ridge needs someone like that. Hell, maybe you need it too." Evelyn looked down at the paper in her hand. The writing was simple. To Rowan Vale. "This woman can cook. Give her a chance. Cade." "He won't hire me," Evelyn said. "Nobody hires me." "Maybe," Cade agreed, "but maybe not. Only one way to find out. Mas." Evelyn left Black Hollow the next morning with a full stomach for the first time in weeks, and a piece of paper that felt like either salvation or another cruel joke. The trail to Iron Ridge climbed higher into the mountains, following a narrow path through dense pine forest. The air grew colder. Snow began to fall, light at first, then heavier, covering the world in white silence. She walked for 2 days. On the afternoon of the second day, exhausted and soaked through from rain that had replaced the snow, Evelyn finally saw Iron Ridge Ranch. It sprawled across a high mountain valley like something carved from stone and will, a main house built from massive logs, a long bunkhouse, several barns, and endless fencing that stretched toward distant peaks. Cattle dotted the valley floor, dark shapes against white snow. The ranch looked powerful and prosperous. It also looked completely lifeless. No smoke rose from the main house. No men worked in the yards. Everything stood silent and still, as if the entire operation had frozen mid-breath. Evelyn approached slowly, her boots crunching in fresh snow. A man appeared from the barn before she'd made it halfway across the yard. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the predatory grace of someone who'd spent his entire life in hard country. He wore a long coat dark with rain, and his face was weathered and severe, framed by dark hair shot through with gray. Rowan Vale. Evelyn knew him immediately, though they'd never met. There was something in the way he carried himself, a man who'd lost everything that mattered and decided to stop caring about the rest. He stopped 20 feet away, studying her with cold gray eyes. "You're on private property," he said. His voice was rough, unused to unnecessary words. Evelyn pulled out Cade's note with shaking hands. "I'm looking for work. Cade sent me." Rowan took the note, read it in 3 seconds, and handed it back. We don't need a cook. Cade said you did. Cade's wrong. Rowan turned to walk away. Please, Evelyn called out, hating the desperation in her voice. I've walked for 15 miles in rain and snow. Just give me a chance. Rowan stopped, but didn't turn around. I've got 20 men who can barely stand each other, who work because they don't have anywhere else to go, who eat whatever slop gets thrown in front of them without complaint. Why would I pay someone to cook for them? Because they deserve better than slop. Now Rowan did turn, his expression darkening. You don't know anything about what my men deserve. You're right, Evelyn agreed. But I know what good food does for people. I know it makes hard work easier. I know it makes men remember they're human instead of just animals surviving. She met his eyes. And I know you're going to send me away, just like everyone else has. But before you do, at least let me make one meal. If your men don't want more after that, I'll leave without argument. Rowan stared at her for a long, brutal moment. One meal, he finally said. You've got until dinner tonight. If my men aren't impressed, you're gone by morning. That's all I'm asking. The kitchen's in the main house. Don't touch anything except what you need for cooking. Don't talk to my men. Don't cause problems. His gray eyes were cold as winter stone. And understand this. I'm not doing you a favor. I'm giving you a chance to prove Cade right. If you can't, you'll walk back down that mountain tonight. Rain or no rain. Then he turned and walked away, leaving Evelyn standing alone in the snow. She looked at the main house, dark, silent, waiting. Then she walked inside to meet her fate. The kitchen was a disaster. Evelyn stood in the doorway, taking in the wreckage of years of neglect. The iron stove was crusted with burned grease. The work table was scarred and filthy. Pots hung on the wall covered in dust. The floor was sticky with spilled food and tracked-in mud. The whole room smelled like defeat. Evelyn set down her small pack, rolled up her sleeves, and went to work. She spent the first hour just cleaning, scrubbing the stove until the iron showed black and clean, washing every pot and pan, mopping the floor with water heated over the fire. The physical work felt good after days of walking. Her body remembered this rhythm, these motions. Once the kitchen was clean, she began exploring the supplies. The pantry held the basics: flour, salt, dried beans, bacon, potatoes, onions, canned tomatoes, coffee, lard. Everything a working ranch would need to keep men fed, but nothing that suggested anyone cared about the food beyond mere fuel. Evelyn began pulling ingredients. She had no recipe, no plan. She simply let her hands remember what they'd done 10,000 times before. The rhythm of cooking that lived in her bones, deeper than thought. She started bread first, mixing flour and water and salt, kneading the dough with strong, practiced hands. While the dough rose, she cubed bacon and rendered the fat in a large pot, then added diced onions until they turned sweet and golden. Potatoes went in next, then flour to make a roux, then beef stock she found in sealed jars in the cellar. The kitchen began to warm. She opened cans of tomatoes and added them to a second pot with beans she'd set to soak earlier. Herbs from dried bundles hanging near the window, sage, thyme, rosemary. A splash of vinegar to brighten the flavor. A spoonful of molasses for depth. The smells began to build. Bacon and onions, rising bread, slow-cooked beans, coffee, brewing strong and black. Evelyn worked without stopping, her focus absolute. She shaped the risen dough into loaves and slid them into the oven. She stirred pots. She tasted and adjusted, adding salt, pepper, a pinch of this, a splash of that. Outside, the sun began to set. The kitchen door opened. A young man stood in the doorway, maybe 19, thin and wary, with nervous eyes. He stared at Evelyn like she might be a ghost. "Ma'am?" he said hesitantly. "The boss said, he said there might be food?" "Dinner's in 30 minutes, Evelyn said without looking up from her work. "You can wait or come back." The young man didn't move. It smells really good. Thank you. We usually just get beans and biscuits." "Not tonight." He lingered another moment, then disappeared. 20 minutes later, men began to arrive. They came slowly, uncertain, ranch hands in worn clothes and broken boots, faces weathered by wind and work, eyes that expected nothing and trusted less. They filed into the dining room attached to the kitchen and sat at the long table in silence. Evelyn counted them as they entered, 20 men, just like Rowan had said. Rowan himself appeared last, taking a seat at the head of the table without acknowledging anyone. The room was completely silent except for the sound of shifting chairs and cleared throats. Evelyn took a deep breath, then began serving. She brought out the bread first, 4 golden loaves, steaming and perfect. Then the stew, thick with potatoes, bacon, and onions, rich enough to stick to ribs through a cold mountain night. Then the beans, slow cooked with tomatoes and herbs until they were tender and flavorful. Finally, fresh coffee, strong and black and hot. She set everything on the table, then stepped back. The men stared at the food like they didn't recognize it. "Well?" Rowan said roughly. "Eat." Someone reached for bread. Then another man. Then everyone moved at once, filling plates, passing bowls, pouring coffee. The first man to take a bite stopped chewing mid-motion. Then slowly, deliberately, he took another bite. Around the table, the same thing happened. Men tasting food and stopping, their expressions shifting from suspicion to surprise to something that looked almost like pain. They ate in complete silence, but it wasn't the hostile silence from before. It was the silence of men who'd forgotten food could taste like this. Like care, like effort, like someone had tried to make something good instead of just edible. Plates emptied. Men went back for seconds, then thirds. The bread disappeared. The stew pot scraped clean. The beans devoured. Evelyn stood in the kitchen doorway, watching. Finally, an older ranch hand, gray-haired and grizzled, set down his fork and looked directly at her. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "that's the best meal I've had in 5 years." Other men nodded, murmuring agreement. Rowan said nothing. He simply stood, walked past Evelyn without a word, and disappeared into the darkness outside. The young ranch hand from earlier approached her hesitantly. "Does this mean you're staying?" "I don't know," Evelyn said honestly. "I hope you do," he said. "This place, it's been dead for a long time. Tonight felt different." After the men filed out, Evelyn cleaned the kitchen in silence, washing dishes and banking the fire for morning. She was hanging the last pot when Rowan's voice came from the doorway. 7 days. She turned. Rowan stood in shadow, his expression unreadable. 7 days, he repeated. "Prove you can do this every day through winter without complaint. Feed 20 men who'll work you harder than any crew you've ever seen. If you can handle it, you've got a job. If you can't, you leave." Evelyn met his cold gray eyes. "That's all I'm asking for. Bunkhouse has an extra room. Small, but it's warm. Be ready to cook breakfast before dawn." Then he was gone. Evelyn stood alone in the warm kitchen, exhausted and uncertain, and more hopeful than she'd felt in months. Outside, snow began to fall again, heavy and silent, covering the mountain in white. And somewhere in that snow-covered darkness, Iron Ridge Ranch held its breath, waiting to see if the woman with nothing but a wooden spoon and stubborn will could bring it back to life. Evelyn woke to darkness and the sound of wind howling against the bunkhouse walls. For a disorienting moment, she didn't know where she was. Then memory returned. Iron Ridge Ranch, the 7-day trial, the meal that had silenced 20 hardened men. She sat up quickly, her breath clouding in the frigid air. The small room Rowan had given her was barely large enough for a narrow bed and a wooden chair, but it had 4 walls and a roof, which was more than she'd had in weeks. She dressed by feel in the pitch darkness, pulling on both her dresses for warmth, then fumbled her way to the door. Outside, the ranch yard was still buried in night. Stars burned cold and distant overhead. Snow crunched under her boots as she crossed to the main house, her old wooden spoon clutched in one hand like a weapon against the dark. The kitchen was freezing. Evelyn worked quickly, building a fire in the stove with kindling from the wood box, coaxing flames to life with stiff fingers. As warmth began to seep into the room, she filled the coffee pot with water and grounds, then turned her attention to breakfast. She had no idea what time the men would expect food, so she simply worked as fast as she could, mixing biscuit dough, slicing bacon, cracking eggs into a bowl. Her hands moved with automatic precision, muscle memory taking over while her mind churned with anxiety. 7 days. She had 7 days to prove herself indispensable to men who'd already decided she probably wasn't worth the trouble. The sky was just beginning to gray when she heard boots on the porch. The door opened and 3 ranch hands filed in, bringing cold air and the smell of horses with them. They stopped when they saw Evelyn at the stove, surprise flickering across their weathered faces. "Morning, ma'am," one of them said awkwardly. He was middle-aged, stocky, with a scar running through his left eyebrow. Didn't expect anyone up this early. Breakfast will be ready in 20 minutes, Evelyn said, keeping her voice steady. Yes, ma'am. The three men retreated to the dining room, speaking in low murmurs. More men arrived in clusters, tired, cold, moving with the heavy silence of people not yet fully awake. They took their places at the long table without conversation, waiting. Rowan appeared last, his face unreadable in the dim lamplight. His gray eyes found Evelyn in the kitchen, held her gaze for one long moment, then looked away. Evelyn served breakfast exactly 23 minutes after the first men had arrived. Biscuits, golden and flaky, still steaming from the oven. Bacon, crispy and perfectly salted. Scrambled eggs, soft and buttery. Gravy, thick and rich, made from the bacon drippings. Coffee, strong enough to wake the dead. The men ate with the same stunned silence as the night before, as if they couldn't quite believe this was real. Evelyn watched from the kitchen, her stomach knotted with tension. This was only day one. She had 6 more days to maintain this standard, to prove she could sustain this level of work through exhaustion and whatever challenges the ranch would throw at her. The older ranch hand who'd spoken the night before, the one who'd called her meal the best in 5 years, caught her eye and nodded slowly. A gesture of respect, or maybe just acknowledgement. It was more than most people had given her in months. After the men filed out to begin their day's work, Evelyn cleaned the kitchen with meticulous care. She was washing the last plate when the young ranch hand from yesterday appeared in the doorway. "Ma'am," he said hesitantly, "I'm supposed to tell you the boss wants you to make lunch around noon. Sandwiches or something the men can take out to the pastures. And dinner's at 6 sharp." "Tell him I understand," Evelyn said. The young man lingered, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "My name's Danny. I've been here about 8 months." Evelyn Mercer. "That was real good, Mrs. Mercer. The food, I mean. We're not used to—" He trailed off, looking embarrassed. "To what?" "To anyone caring, I guess." Danny glanced over his shoulder, then lowered his voice. "Most of the men here, they've got nowhere else to go. Iron Ridge takes people the rest of the world doesn't want. The boss, Mr. Vale, he's fair, but he's hard. Place hasn't felt like much of anything since his wife died." Evelyn studied the young man's earnest face. "How did she die?" Danny's expression darkened. "Fire. 5 years back. Barn caught during a lightning storm. She ran in to save the horses and got trapped. Mr. Vale tried to go in after her, but the whole structure came down. They say he was never the same after that. Just shut himself off from everything." The words settled over Evelyn like a cold blanket. She thought about Rowan's gray eyes, flat and distant, like windows to an empty room. "That's a hard thing to survive," she said quietly. "Yes, ma'am." Danny shifted again. "Anyway, I should get back to work. Just wanted to say thank you for the food." After he left, Evelyn stood alone in the warm kitchen and thought about grief, how it could hollow a person out, how it could turn someone into a ghost walking through their own life. She knew that particular haunting intimately. The morning passed in a blur of work. Evelyn scrubbed every surface in the kitchen until it gleamed, took inventory of the pantry, made a list of supplies that needed replenishing. At noon, she prepared thick sandwiches, leftover bacon, sliced potatoes, sharp cheese, and sent them out with Danny to the men working in the far pastures. The afternoon she spent preparing dinner, a beef roast that had been hanging in the cold cellar, potatoes, carrots, onions, all slow cooked together until the meat fell apart at the touch of a fork. The men arrived at 6 o'clock exactly, filing in with the same exhausted silence as breakfast. But this time Evelyn noticed something different in their expressions. Not quite hope, but maybe the absence of complete resignation. They ate without speaking, but the silence felt less hostile than before, almost comfortable. After dinner, as Evelyn was banking the fire for the night, a shadow filled the kitchen doorway. Rowan stood there, still wearing his work coat, snow melting on his shoulders. "The men are talking," he said without preamble. Evelyn's heart sank. "About me?" "About the food." He stepped into the kitchen, his presence somehow filling the entire space. "They're saying it's the best they've ever had. They're saying the kitchen hasn't felt this warm in years. They're asking how long you're staying." "What did you tell them?" "That it depends on whether you can last 7 days. Evelyn met his eyes. "I can last 7 days." Rowan studied her with that same cold, assessing gaze. You're not what I expected when Cade sent his note. What did you expect? Someone younger, someone. He paused, searching for the word. Harder. Frontier women usually are by the time they end up at places like this. I am hard, Evelyn said quietly. I just don't look like it. Something flickered in Rowan's expression, almost like recognition. No, I suppose you don't. He turned to leave, then stopped. The men respect strength. They've seen too many people break under the weight of this place. If you want them to accept you, you'll need to show them you won't break either. I won't, Evelyn said. We'll see. Then he was gone, leaving her alone with the dying fire and the weight of his words. The second day began exactly like the first. Darkness, cold, the lonely walk across the frozen yard to the kitchen. But this time, Evelyn felt a small seed of confidence growing beneath the anxiety. She'd survived one day. She could survive another. Breakfast was bacon and eggs again, but with fried potatoes this time, crispy and golden. The men ate with slightly less suspicion, slightly more appreciation. Danny appeared after the meal with a message from Rowan. The boss wanted her to start planning meals a week in advance, to give him time to order any special supplies from town. He's never asked a cook to do that before, Danny said, grinning. I think he's planning to keep you past the 7 days. Don't get ahead of yourself, Evelyn warned, but she felt a flutter of hope anyway. The third day brought the first real test. Evelyn was in the middle of preparing lunch when a ranch hand she hadn't met yet walked into the kitchen. He was huge, easily 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders like an ox and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite with a dull axe. He stared at her for a long moment, his expression hostile. You're the new cook, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Name's Coleman. He crossed his arms over his massive chest. I don't trust you. Evelyn set down her knife slowly. Why not? Because women like you don't end up at places like this unless they're running from something. And people who are running eventually bring their trouble with them. I'm not bringing trouble, Evelyn said evenly. I'm just trying to survive. That's what they all say. Coleman stepped closer, using his size to intimidate. I've seen your type before. You'll cook for a few weeks, get comfortable, start thinking you're important. Then you'll start making demands, causing problems between the men, turning this place into a circus. Evelyn felt anger rise hot in her chest, but she forced her voice to stay calm. I'm here to cook. That's all. I don't want anything else. Sure you don't. Coleman's lip curled. Just stay out of my way, woman. And don't expect me to pretend your food is anything special just because the other men are too stupid to see through you. He turned and stalked out, leaving Evelyn shaking with suppressed fury. That night at dinner, Coleman sat at the far end of the table, eating in hostile silence while the other men talked quietly among themselves. When Evelyn brought out dessert, a simple apple cobbler made from dried fruit, Coleman pushed his plate away without tasting it. Not hungry, he said loudly. Had enough of trying to be impressed. The table went silent. Evelyn felt every eye turn toward her, waiting to see how she'd react. She walked over to Coleman's place, picked up the untouched cobbler, and returned it to the kitchen without a word. Then she came back and began clearing other plates, her movements calm and deliberate. Coleman watched her with narrowed eyes, clearly expecting a fight. Evelyn gave him nothing. After the men left, Danny lingered behind. Don't let Coleman get to you, Mrs. Mercer. He's like that with everyone. Mean as a snake and twice as ornery. I'm not worried about Coleman, Evelyn said, though her hands were still trembling as she washed dishes. Good. Because the rest of us, we think you're doing real good. The fourth day, Coleman escalated. Evelyn was carrying a pot of stew from the stove to the dining room when he deliberately stepped into her path, forcing her to stop short or collide with him. Careful, he said mockingly. Wouldn't want you to hurt yourself. Move, Evelyn said quietly. Or what? Coleman leaned down, using his height to loom over her. You gonna run to the boss? Tell him the big mean cowboy was rude to you? Evelyn looked up at him, this massive man who thought his size made him powerful, and felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. No, she said. I'm going to do my job, which means you need to move out of my way, now. For a long moment, Coleman didn't budge. Then, with a sneer, he stepped aside. Evelyn walked past him without another word. But that night, After dinner, she found her cooking pot, the cracked pot Thomas had given her on their wedding day, lying on the ground outside the kitchen door. Someone had kicked it into the mud. Evelyn picked it up with shaking hands, wiping away the dirt, and carried it back inside. She was scrubbing it clean when Rowan appeared in the doorway. "Problem?" he asked. Evelyn wanted to tell him about Coleman, about the intimidation and the deliberate cruelty. But something stopped her. Danny's words echoed in her mind. The men respect strength. They've seen too many people break. "No problem," she said. Rowan's eyes narrowed. "You're lying." "I'm handling it." "Handling what?" Evelyn set the pot down and turned to face him. "I know Coleman doesn't want me here. I know he's trying to make me quit, but I'm not going to give him that satisfaction. I'm going to do my job, and I'm going to do it well, and eventually he'll either accept it or he won't. Either way, I'm not leaving." Rowan stared at her for a long moment. "Coleman's a good worker, strong, reliable, but he doesn't like change, and he especially doesn't like being told what to do by anyone he sees as weak." "I'm not weak." "I know." Rowan's expression shifted slightly, not quite a smile, but close. "Which is why I'm going to let you handle this your way. But if he crosses a line, you tell me. Understood?" "Understood." After Rowan left, Evelyn stood alone in the kitchen, holding her cracked cooking pot, and made a silent promise to herself she would not break. Not for Coleman, not for anyone. The fifth day brought a blizzard. Evelyn woke to the sound of wind screaming against the bunkhouse like a living thing trying to tear the building apart. When she opened the door, snow blasted into her face with such force she could barely breathe. The walk to the main house took 15 minutes instead of 5. By the time she reached the kitchen, her dress was soaked through and she couldn't feel her fingers. But she built the fire anyway, prepared breakfast anyway, had everything ready when the men stumbled in from the storm, half frozen and miserable. The hot food and coffee brought them back to life. Evelyn watched as color returned to their faces, as their shivering gradually stopped, as they began to talk in low, grateful voices. Even Coleman ate without complaint, though he still wouldn't meet her eyes. After breakfast, Rowan pulled her aside. "Storm's going to last at least 2 days. Men can't work in this. They'll be stuck inside, restless and angry. Can you handle feeding them 3 meals a day, keeping them satisfied enough they don't tear each other apart out of boredom?" "Yes," Evelyn said without hesitation. "Good, because if this place falls apart, it'll be during times like this." He was right. By mid-afternoon the first day, tension was already building. Men paced the bunkhouse, snapping at each other over nothing, bored and frustrated and too full of energy with nowhere to spend it. Evelyn responded the only way she knew how, with food. She made fresh bread and set it out with butter and honey. She prepared a massive pot of beef stew with dumplings. She baked cookies using the last of the sugar, filling the house with the smell of cinnamon and warmth. When she brought the cookies to the bunkhouse that evening, the men stared at her like she'd performed a miracle. "Ma'am," one of them said quietly, "you didn't have to do this." "I know," Evelyn said, "but I wanted to." That night, as the blizzard raged outside, the bunkhouse filled with the sound of men talking, laughing, sharing stories. The first real warmth Evelyn had heard since arriving at Iron Ridge. The 6th day, the storm broke. Evelyn woke to silence and a world transformed by snow. Drifts stood 4 feet high against the buildings. The sky was clear and brutally cold, the sun so bright on the white landscape it hurt to look at. The men dug out pathways, cleared the barn doors, tended to half-frozen cattle. Everyone worked with desperate intensity, trying to make up for 2 days of forced idleness. Evelyn cooked constantly, breakfast, lunch, dinner, plus coffee and bread in between to keep the men going. By nightfall, she was so exhausted she could barely stand. She was banking the fire when Coleman appeared in the kitchen doorway. Evelyn tensed, bracing for another confrontation. But Coleman just stood there, his massive frame filling the entrance, his expression unreadable. "You worked hard today," he said finally. "So did everyone else." "Not like you." He shifted uncomfortably. "I've been watching. You don't stop. You don't complain. You just keep going." Evelyn waited, unsure where this was heading. Coleman looked down at his boots. "I was wrong about you. Thought you'd quit by now. Thought you were just another desperate woman looking for an easy place to hide." He met her eyes. But you're tougher than most men I know, and your cooking. He paused, something almost like shame crossing his face. Your cooking's the best I've ever had. Makes this place feel less like a prison and more like something else. Evelyn felt the tight knot of tension she'd been carrying for days begin to loosen. Thank you. Don't thank me. I was an ass. Still am, probably. Coleman turned to leave, then stopped. But for what it's worth, I hope you stay past the 7 days. This place needs you. Then he was gone, leaving Evelyn alone in the warm kitchen with tears burning behind her eyes. The 7th day arrived with crystalline cold and perfect silence. Evelyn prepared breakfast with special care: eggs, bacon, pancakes, fresh biscuits, gravy, coffee. The men ate with the easy comfort of people who'd begun to trust that this good thing might actually last. After breakfast, Rowan approached her in the kitchen. 7 days, he said. I know. You did what I asked, fed my men without complaint, kept this place running through a blizzard, handled Coleman without coming to me for help. He paused. Why? Evelyn looked at him, this hard, damaged man who'd given her a chance when no one else would. Because I needed to prove to myself that I could, that I wasn't just surviving anymore, that I could actually build something again. Rowan nodded slowly. The job's yours. $40 a month plus room and board. You'll cook 3 meals a day for however many men are on the ranch. You'll keep the kitchen and pantry in order, and you'll tell me immediately if you need anything to do your job properly. I accept. Good. Rowan started to leave, then turned back. Evelyn? That is your name, right? Evelyn? Yes. You've changed this place in 7 days. The men work harder. They fight less. They smile more. His gray eyes held hers. Don't stop. Whatever you're doing, don't stop. I won't, Evelyn promised. After he left, she stood in the kitchen she'd claimed as her own and let herself feel the full weight of what she'd accomplished. She'd walked into these mountains with nothing but a cracked pot and stubborn will. She'd been rejected, mocked, dismissed as worthless. But she hadn't disappeared. She'd found Iron Ridge Ranch, this hard, frozen place full of broken men and buried grief. And somehow, impossibly, she'd begun to bring it back to life. The weeks that followed the 7-day trial settled into a rhythm that felt almost like peace. Evelyn cooked 3 meals a day, kept the kitchen spotless, and slowly began to understand the men who ate her food. She learned their names, their stories, the small preferences that made them individuals instead of just a hungry crowd. Danny liked extra butter on his biscuits. Coleman had a weakness for anything sweet. The grizzled older hand named Marcus always asked for seconds on vegetables, saying they reminded him of his mother's cooking. The men, in turn, began to protect her in small ways. When supplies ran low, someone always volunteered to make the long ride into town. When the stove needed repair, 3 different men showed up with tools before she'd even mentioned the problem. When snow blocked the path from the bunkhouse to the main house, it was cleared before dawn without anyone taking credit. Iron Ridge was coming back to life, and everyone could feel it, but Rowan remained distant. He ate every meal in silence, never participating in the conversations growing around the table. He gave orders in his rough, clipped voice and disappeared for hours at a time, riding alone into the high pastures. The only time Evelyn saw emotion in his gray eyes was when he looked at the barn, the one that had been rebuilt after the fire that killed his wife. Then his expression would close down completely, like shutters slamming over windows. One evening in late November, Evelyn was preparing dinner when she heard shouting from the yard. She looked out the window to see 2 ranch hands squaring off, faces flushed with anger. You calling me a liar? One of them, a wiry man named Peters, shouted. I'm saying you're full of shit, the other man, Hayes, shot back. That's enough. Rowan's voice cut through the argument like a blade. He appeared between the 2 men, his presence immediately dominating the space. What's this about? Hayes here says I didn't secure the fence line properly, Peters said hotly. Says I'm the reason 3 steers got out yesterday. Because you didn't, Hayes insisted. I checked your work. Half the posts weren't set deep enough. You don't know what you're talking about. I said enough. Rowan's voice dropped to something dangerous. Peters, you'll redo the entire fence line tomorrow. Hayes, you'll help him. Both of you will work until the job's done right, even if it takes all night. Understood? Both men nodded sullenly. As they dispersed, Rowan stood alone in the yard, his shoulders tight with tension. Then he looked up and saw Evelyn watching from the window. Their eyes met across the distance. Something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. Two people who carried weights no one else could see. Then Rowan turned and walked toward the barn, disappearing into its shadow. That night at dinner, the mood was subdued. Peters and Hayes sat at opposite ends of the table, refusing to look at each other. The other men ate quietly, the earlier warmth dampened by conflict. Evelyn watched Rowan at the head of the table. Alone, even surrounded by his men, isolated by authority and grief. After everyone left, she found him standing outside the barn, staring at the rebuilt structure in the moonlight. "Mr. Vale?" she said quietly. He didn't turn. "You should be inside. It's cold." "So should you." "I'm fine." Evelyn moved to stand beside him. Up close, she could see the lines carved deep around his eyes, the gray threading through his dark hair, the exhaustion etched into every part of him. "This is where it happened," Rowan said suddenly. "The fire. Right here." Evelyn said nothing, just listened. Her name was Catherine. We'd been married 8 years. She was everything this place wasn't. Warm, kind, always laughing. She made me believe I could be something other than just a man working himself to death on a mountain. His voice was flat, emotionless, like he was reading from a script. The lightning struck during a summer storm. Barn went up in seconds. She ran in to save the horses. I tried to follow her, but the roof collapsed, trapped her inside. I could hear her screaming, and I couldn't. His voice cracked. I couldn't reach her. "I'm sorry," Evelyn said softly. "Everyone's sorry doesn't change anything." Rowan turned to look at her finally. "Why are you out here, Evelyn? Why aren't you inside where it's warm?" "Because I know what it's like to stand alone with grief," she said. "I lost my husband 3 months ago. Lost my home. Lost everything that made me feel like I mattered. So I understand why you stand out here in the cold, because inside is warm, and warmth reminds you of everything you lost." Rowan stared at her, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she saw real emotion in his eyes. Not anger or authority or cold distance, just raw, exhausted pain. "I don't know how to stop," he said quietly. "Stop what?" "Being this. Being—" He gestured vaguely at himself. "Dead inside. The ranch runs, the men work, everything functions. But I haven't felt anything in 5 years except the weight of getting through another day." Evelyn thought about her own months of numbness after Thomas died, the hollow feeling of moving through a world that had lost all color and meaning. "You don't have to stop all at once," she said. "You just have to let yourself feel something small. Notice something good. Let one moment matter." "Like what?" "Like the fact that your men smiled at dinner tonight before the fight. Like the smell of fresh bread. Like the way the moon looks on snow." She paused. "Like the fact that you're talking to me right now, instead of shutting everyone out." Rowan was silent for a long time. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, he said, "Thank you." "For what?" "For not treating me like I'm broken. For just standing here." They stood together in the cold for a few more minutes, two damaged people finding strange comfort in shared silence. Then Rowan turned and walked back toward the main house, and Evelyn returned to the warmth of her small room, feeling something shift in the frozen landscape of Iron Ridge Ranch. Something small, but real. Something that felt almost like hope. December arrived with teeth. The temperature dropped so low that water froze solid in the buckets overnight, and the men's breath hung in the air like smoke even inside the bunkhouse. The mountains disappeared behind walls of snow and cloud, cutting Iron Ridge off from the rest of the world as effectively as if the ranch existed on another planet entirely. Evelyn had never experienced cold like this. The Missouri Valley had winters, but nothing compared to the brutal isolation of the high frontier. Some mornings she woke to find frost coating the inside of her window, intricate patterns of ice that looked almost beautiful, until she remembered they meant the temperature had fallen well below zero. But the kitchen stayed warm. And as long as the kitchen stayed warm, the ranch stayed alive. She cooked through the darkness. rising before dawn to build fires, preparing hot breakfasts that sent men into the frozen morning with enough fuel to survive, making lunches that could be carried into wind that cut like knives, creating dinners that brought everyone back together when the sun died and the real cold began. The men began staying longer at meals, lingering over coffee, reluctant to leave the warmth and return to the brutal world outside. Conversations grew longer, deeper. Stories emerged that had been buried for years. Marcus, the grizzled older hand, talked about his wife who'd died giving birth to their third child 40 years ago. "Never remarried," he said quietly one night. "Couldn't imagine anyone taking her place. So I just kept moving, ranch to ranch, trying to outrun the grief." "Did it work?" Danny asked. Marcus smiled sadly. "Grief doesn't care how far you run. It waits for you wherever you stop." Coleman talked about growing up in the coal mines of Pennsylvania, watching his father die coughing up black lung at 45. "Came west to find clean air," he said. "Found hard work instead. But at least I can breathe." Even Hayes and Peters, who'd fought over the fence line, began sharing meals without hostility. The work had forced them together, and somewhere in the shared misery of digging fence posts in frozen ground, they'd found something like friendship. But Rowan remained silent through all of it, eating alone in his thoughts even when surrounded by his men. Evelyn watched him across the table night after night, this man who'd given her a chance when no one else would, who carried his grief like stones in his pockets, weighing him down until he could barely move. She wanted to reach him, wanted to crack through the ice that had formed around him the same way she'd begun cracking through the ice around the ranch itself. But she didn't know how. The answer came on a night when the temperature dropped so low that even the bunkhouse stove couldn't keep up. Evelyn woke near midnight to the sound of someone pounding on her door. She stumbled out of bed, disoriented and frightened, and opened the door to find Danny standing in the freezing darkness, his face pale with worry. "Mrs. Mercer, you need to come quick. It's Marcus. He's real sick." Evelyn grabbed her coat and followed Danny across the yard to the bunkhouse. Inside, the men had gathered around Marcus's bunk. The old ranch hand lay shivering under every blanket they could find, his face flushed with fever, his breathing labored and wet. "Started coughing this afternoon," Coleman said, his usual gruffness replaced by genuine concern. "Thought it was just the cold, but he's getting worse." Evelyn knelt beside the bunk and placed her hand on Marcus's forehead. His skin burned hot enough to scald. "Pneumonia," she said quietly. "We need to break the fever." "How?" Danny asked. "Hot water, clean cloths, willow bark if we have it." She looked around at the watching men. "And we need to keep him warm, but not too warm. The fever needs to come down gradually." For the next 3 hours, Evelyn worked with a focus that shut out everything else. She sent men to heat water, to find extra blankets, to search the supplies for anything that might help. She bathed Marcus's face and chest with cool cloths, forced him to drink willow bark tea when he was lucid enough to swallow, monitored his breathing with the careful attention of someone who'd nursed sick people before. The men watched in silence, their earlier swagger and toughness stripped away by fear of losing one of their own. Somewhere around 3 a.m, Rowan appeared in the doorway. He took in the scene immediately. Evelyn kneeling beside Marcus's bunk, the worried men gathered close, the desperate attempt to save a life in the middle of a frozen night. "How bad?" he asked. "Bad," Evelyn said without looking up. "But he's strong. If we can break the fever, he might make it." Rowan moved closer, looking down at Marcus's flushed face. Something flickered in his eyes. Memory, maybe, or old pain surfacing. "Catherine died like this," he said quietly. "Not from the fire. After. She survived the burns for 2 days, but her lungs were damaged from the smoke. Pneumonia took her before she could heal." Evelyn looked up at him. "Marcus isn't Catherine." "I know, but—" Rowan's voice caught. "I couldn't save her. Couldn't do anything but watch her die." "You're not watching now," Evelyn said firmly. "You're here. That matters." Rowan stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. He shed his coat and rolled up his sleeves. "Tell me what to do." Together they worked through the night, Evelyn directing, Rowan following her instructions with the same intense focus he brought to everything, the other men rotating through tasks with quiet efficiency. By dawn, Marcus's fever had broken. He opened his eyes as weak winter light filtered through the bunkhouse windows, looking confused and exhausted. "What happened?" he croaked. "You got sick," Coleman said gruffly. "Mrs. Mercer saved your life." Marcus turned his head to look at Evelyn, who was slumped against the wall, her dress soaked with sweat despite the cold, her eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion. "Thank you," he whispered. "Rest," Evelyn said. "You're not out of danger yet." But they all knew he would survive. The worst had passed. As the men began to disperse, preparing for another day of brutal work despite the sleepless night, Rowan caught Evelyn's arm. "That was remarkable," he said. "That was necessity," Evelyn corrected. "Marcus needed help. I knew how to give it." "Most people would have panicked or given up." "I'm not most people." Rowan smiled, a real smile, small and fleeting, but genuine. "No, you're not." After that night, something shifted between Evelyn and Rowan. He began seeking her out more often, appearing in the kitchen after dinner to help with dishes or simply to talk. Their conversations were stilted at first, full of long pauses and careful words, but gradually they found a rhythm. He told her about building the ranch from nothing, about the years of back-breaking work that had turned a wild mountain valley into something productive and valuable. Catherine hated it at first, he admitted one evening. She came from a town, had grown up with neighbors and society. The isolation nearly broke her. But eventually, she found beauty in it. Said the mountains made her feel small in a good way. Like her problems didn't matter as much when she was surrounded by something so vast and permanent. "She sounds like she was strong," Evelyn said. "She was. Stronger than me in a lot of ways." Rowan was quiet for a moment. "I think that's why it destroyed me when she died. I'd relied on her strength so much, I forgot how to find my own." Evelyn understood that completely. Thomas had been her anchor too, the person who made her feel valuable when the world said she wasn't. "You're finding it now," she said. "Your strength. I see it when you work with the men, when you make decisions, when you don't give up even though everything is hard." Rowan looked at her with those gray eyes that had started to hold warmth instead of just cold distance. "You see a lot. I pay attention. Why?" The question caught her off guard. "What do you mean? Why do you care?" Rowan's voice was soft but intense. "You could do your job, collect your pay, keep your distance, but instead you stay up all night nursing sick ranch hands. You notice when someone's struggling, you care about this place and these people, even though none of them did anything to earn it." Evelyn thought about the question carefully before answering. "Because for most of my life, no one saw me. I was just Thomas's wife, then Thomas's widow. The woman who cooked and cleaned and took up space. When he died and the debts came, the whole town looked through me like I was already a ghost." She met Rowan's eyes. "But here, I matter. The men need me. The ranch needs me. And maybe I need to be needed. Maybe that's enough reason to care." Rowan reached out slowly and took her hand, a simple gesture that felt monumental in its intimacy. "You matter," he said quietly. "More than you know." They stood like that in the warm kitchen, hands clasped, the winter darkness pressing against the windows, and Evelyn felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been frozen since Thomas died, something that hurt and healed at the same time. Then Rowan released her hand and stepped back, and the moment passed, but its echo remained, changing the air between them. December deepened into the heart of winter. The ranch settled into a pattern of hard work and small comforts, the men growing closer as the isolation forced them to rely on each other. But tension was building too. Supplies were running low. The storms had been worse than expected, making trips to town dangerous and unpredictable. The last shipment had been delayed by 2 weeks, and now the pantry showed gaps that worried Evelyn every time she looked at it. She began rationing carefully, stretching ingredients, getting creative with limited resources. The men didn't complain, but she could see the hunger in their eyes at the end of long work days. One afternoon in mid-December, Rowan called her into his office, a small room off the main house where he kept ledgers and maps and the records that kept the ranch running. "We need to talk about supplies," he said without preamble. "I know they're low. Lower than you think." Rowan showed her the ledgers. "We've got enough flour for maybe another 3 weeks. Sugar's already gone. Salt pork is running out. The next supply run isn't scheduled until after Christmas, and even that depends on the weather cooperating." Evelyn studied the numbers, her mind racing through calculations. "I can make it work. Reduce portions slightly, eliminate luxuries, focus on basics. The men are already working at the edge of their endurance, Rowan said. If they don't eat enough, they won't be able to handle the labor. And if they can't handle the labor, we lose cattle. Lose enough cattle, the ranch fails. What are you saying? Rowan looked at her steadily. I'm saying someone needs to make a supply run to Black Hollow, soon, before the next big storm hits. Send Coleman, or Hayes. They're strong riders. I need them here. We're moving the herd to lower pastures tomorrow, and I can't spare anyone who knows the land. He paused. I was thinking I'd go myself. Fear shot through Evelyn's chest. Alone? In this weather? I've done it before. That was before the temperature dropped this low, before the snow got this deep. She stepped closer, her voice urgent. Rowan, if something happens to you out there, this whole place falls apart. If we run out of food, it falls apart anyway. They stared at each other, the weight of impossible choices pressing down on them both. Finally, Evelyn said, Then send 2 riders, someone you trust completely. Give them enough money to buy everything we need and get back here safely. Rowan considered this, then nodded slowly. Danny and Peters. Danny's young, but he's steady, and Peters knows the route. When? Tomorrow at first light. The next morning, Evelyn woke early and prepared traveling supplies, dried meat, hard biscuits, a flask of whiskey for warmth, matches wrapped in oilcloth. She packed everything into saddlebags with meticulous care, knowing that these supplies might mean the difference between life and death on the mountain trails. Danny and Peters stood in the pre-dawn darkness, checking their horses and weapons with the grim focus of men heading into danger. Rowan gave them final instructions, a list of needed supplies, and enough money to cover everything plus emergencies. Stay together, he said. If the weather turns, find shelter immediately. Don't try to be heroes. And if it comes down to a choice between the supplies and getting back alive, you abandon the supplies. Understood? Both men nodded. Evelyn approached Danny and pressed something into his hand, her old wooden spoon wrapped in cloth. What's this for? Danny asked, confused. Luck, Evelyn said. It's survived everything I've been through. Maybe it'll help you do the same. Danny smiled and tucked the spoon into his coat. I'll bring it back, Mrs. Mercer. Promise. Then they mounted their horses and rode out into the frozen gray morning, disappearing into the trees within minutes. The ranch felt emptier without them. Evelyn went through the motions of the day, cooking, cleaning, managing the depleted pantry with increasingly creative desperation. But her mind kept returning to 2 young men riding through deadly cold, carrying the ranch's survival in their saddlebags. That night at dinner, the table was quieter than usual. Everyone was thinking about Danny and Peters, about the risks they were taking, about how much depended on their safe return. Marcus, still recovering but well enough to sit at the table, finally broke the silence. They'll make it. Danny's got a good head on his shoulders, and Peters is tougher than he looks. Weather's the real danger, Coleman muttered, not the ride itself. Then we hope the weather holds, Hayes said firmly, because worrying won't change anything. But everyone worried anyway. 3 days passed with no word. Then 4. Then 5. The temperature continued to drop. New snow fell. Supplies continued to dwindle. Evelyn stretched every ingredient to its breaking point. Breakfast became smaller, lunch almost disappeared. Dinner was thin soup and hard biscuits. The men never complained, but she could see them growing leaner, their faces hollow with hunger they tried to hide. On the 6th day, Rowan found her in the pantry, staring at nearly empty shelves. How long? He asked. 4 days. Maybe 5 if I cut portions even more. Don't. The men need every calorie they're getting. Then we're out of time. Rowan's jaw tightened. I'm riding out tomorrow, following their route. Something's wrong. You can't. I can, and I will. His voice left no room for argument. I sent them into danger. If they're in trouble, I'm not leaving them out there. Evelyn wanted to argue, wanted to tell him it was suicide to go alone into the winter mountains. But she could see the determination in his eyes, the guilt that drove him. Then I'm coming with you, she said. Rowan stared at her. Absolutely not. You need someone watching your back, someone who can help if you find them injured, someone who won't let you do something stupid trying to be a hero. Evelyn, I'm coming, she said firmly. You gave me a chance when no one else would. Now I'm returning the favor. We leave at dawn. They argued for another 20 minutes, but Evelyn refused to back down. Finally, Rowan threw up his hands in frustration and stalked out of the pantry, muttering about stubborn women who didn't understand mountains. But he didn't forbid her from going. That night, Evelyn barely slept. She packed supplies, checked equipment, prepared everything she could think of for a journey into the frozen wilderness. Her hands shook as she worked, fear and determination warring inside her chest. She was terrified, but she was also certain. Some things mattered more than safety. Some people were worth risking everything to save. Dawn came cold and clear. Evelyn dressed in every piece of warm clothing she owned, then met Rowan in the yard where he'd prepared 2 horses. Coleman and Marcus stood nearby, their expressions grim. "You're both insane," Coleman said flatly. "Probably," Rowan agreed, "but we're going anyway." "Then come back," Marcus said quietly. "All 4 of you. This place needs you." Evelyn mounted her horse, a steady mare named Dancer, and settled into the saddle. She hadn't ridden in years and her body protested immediately. But she ignored the discomfort and nodded to Rowan. "Ready?" They rode out as the sun broke over the eastern peaks, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink that would have been beautiful if Evelyn hadn't been so frightened. The trail to Black Hollow climbed through dense forest, the path narrow and treacherous with ice. Rowan rode in front, guiding them with the confidence of someone who knew every inch of this country. Evelyn followed close behind, trusting his judgment completely. They rode in silence for hours, stopping only to rest the horses and check for signs of Danny and Peter's passage. The cold was relentless, seeping through layers of clothing, numbing exposed skin, turning breath into ice crystals that clung to scarves and beards. By mid-afternoon, they'd covered nearly 15 miles without finding any trace of the missing men. "Should have seen something by now," Rowan muttered, studying the empty trail ahead. "Tracks, campsites, something." "Maybe they took a different route," Evelyn suggested. "There is no different route. This is the only safe path to Black Hollow." His expression darkened. "Unless they got lost, or hurt, or—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. They pressed on as the sun began its descent, racing against the coming darkness. The temperature dropped further. Wind picked up, driving snow into their faces like needles. Just as Evelyn was beginning to think they'd have to make camp, Rowan suddenly pulled his horse to a stop. "There," he said, pointing. Evelyn followed his gaze and saw it, a thin column of smoke rising from somewhere off the main trail, barely visible against the darkening sky. They dismounted and led the horses through deep snow toward the smoke's source. The forest grew denser, the going harder, branches catching at their clothes and snow falling from overhead in heavy clumps. Then they broke through into a small clearing and saw them. Danny and Peters had made camp in a sheltered spot beneath an overhanging rock. Their horses stood nearby, heads down against the cold. A small fire burned, barely more than embers but still alive, and the 2 men sat huddled beside it, wrapped in blankets, very much alive. "Boss?" Danny's voice was weak but clear. "Mrs. Mercer, what are you doing here?" Rowan rushed forward. "What happened? Why didn't you make it back?" Peters answered, his face pale and drawn. "Storm hit the second day. Bad one. We took shelter in Black Hollow for 3 days waiting it out. Then on the way back my horse went lame. Couldn't ride double in this weather with the supplies, so we've been holed up here trying to figure out what to do." "You should have abandoned the supplies and walked back," Rowan said. "We talked about it," Danny admitted. "But we knew how bad things were getting, knew the ranch needed these goods. So we decided to wait 1 more day, hope someone came looking." Evelyn knelt beside the fire and began pulling out the food she'd packed. "Are either of you hurt?" "Just cold," Peter said, "and hungry. Ran out of food yesterday." "Not anymore." She distributed dried meat and biscuits, watching with satisfaction as the 2 men ate with desperate relief. While they ate, Rowan examined Peters's horse. The animal had indeed gone lame, a stone bruise that had worsened with continued riding. "We'll have to leave the horse," Rowan said. "Redistribute the supplies between the 3 remaining horses and ride double. It'll be slower, but we'll make it back before the next storm." They worked quickly, transferring supply bags, making sure everything was secure. By the time they finished, full darkness had fallen and the temperature had dropped to the point where standing still meant risking frostbite. "We camp here tonight," Rowan decided. "Start back at first light." That night, huddled around the rebuilt fire with four people sharing warmth and the certainty that they'd found each other in time, Evelyn felt something she hadn't experienced in longer than she could remember. She felt like she belonged to something, like she was part of a family again. These hard frontier men who'd doubted her at first, who'd mocked and dismissed her, were now risking their lives to keep the ranch fed. And she was risking hers to bring them home. Rowan sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched through layers of heavy clothing. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "Thank you for letting me." "I didn't let you. You forced your way along." "Same thing." He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his severe face into something warmer. "You're remarkable, Evelyn Mercer. You know that?" "I'm stubborn," she corrected. "That too." He was quiet for a moment, but also brave and kind and strong in ways I'm only beginning to understand. Evelyn felt heat rise in her face that had nothing to do with the fire. "You're not so bad yourself, Rowan Vale." Across the fire, Danny and Peters pretended not to listen, but both men were grinning. They started back at dawn, moving slowly with the extra weight and doubled riders. The journey took twice as long as the ride out, the horses struggling through deep snow, everyone tense with the awareness that another storm could hit at any moment. But the weather held. 3 days after leaving the ranch, they crested the final ridge and saw Iron Ridge spread below them, smoke rising from chimneys, men moving through the yard, the whole operation still alive and functioning. Coleman and Marcus ran out to meet them, relief written across their weathered faces. "Thank the mountains," Marcus said. "We thought we'd lost all of you." "Almost did," Peters admitted. "But the boss and Mrs. Mercer found us just in time." That night, with the supplies safely stored and everyone warm and fed, the bunkhouse filled with celebration. The men told and retold the story of the rescue, adding dramatic flourishes with each version. Evelyn cooked a feast that used up more supplies than she should have allowed, but no one cared. They were all together. They were all alive. That was enough. Later, after the men had gone to bed and the kitchen was clean, Evelyn stood at the window looking out at the snow-covered mountains. Behind her, she heard footsteps. Rowan appeared beside her, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He offered her one without speaking. They stood together in comfortable silence, drinking coffee and watching the winter night. "I was wrong," Rowan said finally. "About what?" "About thinking I'd never feel anything again. About believing this place was just a prison I was serving time in until I died." He turned to look at her. "You changed that. You changed everything." Evelyn's heart hammered in her chest. "I just cook, Rowan." "No. You do so much more than that." He set down his coffee cup and took both her hands in his. "You brought life back to Iron Ridge. You made my men remember how to be human instead of just survivors. You made me remember what it feels like to want something beyond just getting through another day." "What do you want?" Evelyn whispered. "You," Rowan said simply. "I want you to stay. Not because the ranch needs a cook, but because I need you. Because when I thought about something happening to you out there in the mountains, I realized I couldn't stand the idea of this world without you in it." Tears burned in Evelyn's eyes. "I'm not who I was before, Rowan. I'm broken in ways I don't know how to fix." "So am I," he said. "But maybe broken things can still fit together. Maybe they can be stronger for the breaking." He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away. But Evelyn didn't pull away. She met him halfway, and when their lips touched, it felt like coming home after a long journey through cold and darkness. The kiss was gentle, tentative, full of the careful hope of 2 people who'd learned the hard way that good things could be taken away without warning. When they finally separated, both breathing hard, Rowan rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he said again. "I'm not going anywhere," Evelyn promised. Outside, the winter wind howled, but inside Iron Ridge Ranch, warmth bloomed like spring flowers pushing through snow. And for the first time in 5 years, Rowan Vale let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, life might be worth living again. The days following that kiss carried a strange electricity through Iron Ridge Ranch. Nothing had officially changed. Evelyn still cooked 3 meals a day, Rowan still ran the operation with stern efficiency, the men still worked from dawn until darkness swallowed the mountain valleys. But everyone could feel the shift in the air, the way Rowan's eyes followed Evelyn when he thought no one was watching, the way her voice softened when she spoke his name. The men said nothing directly, But Coleman started smirking into his coffee at breakfast, and Danny developed a habit of finding urgent work elsewhere whenever Rowan appeared in the kitchen after dinner. Marcus simply nodded to himself with the satisfied expression of someone who'd seen this coming from miles away. Christmas approached with relentless cold. The supplies Danny and Peters had brought back kept everyone fed, but barely. Evelyn rationed with religious precision, making every ounce of flour count, stretching meat until it was more memory than substance in the stews. One evening in late December, as she was measuring out the last of the sugar, Rowan entered the kitchen carrying something wrapped in burlap. "What's that?" Evelyn asked. He set the bundle on the table with surprising gentleness. "Open it." She unwrapped the cloth carefully and found herself staring at 3 glass jars of preserved peaches, their golden fruit suspended in sweet syrup like captured sunlight. "Where did you get these?" Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "I've had them in the cellar since last summer. Been saving them." Rowan looked almost embarrassed. "Catherine used to make these every year. These were the last batch before she died. I couldn't bring myself to open them, couldn't stand the idea of eating the last thing her hands had made." Evelyn understood immediately. These weren't just preserved fruit, they were the final physical connection to someone he'd loved and lost. "Rowan, I can't." "Yes, you can." He pushed the jars toward her. She'd want them used. She'd hate knowing they were sitting in the dark, going to waste. He paused, his gray eyes holding hers. "And I want the men to have something good for Christmas. Something that reminds them there's still sweetness in the world, even when everything feels frozen and impossible." Evelyn reached out and took his hand across the table. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I have no idea if they're still good after 5 years." But they were. On Christmas morning, Evelyn opened those jars and used the precious fruit to make a cobbler that filled the entire house with the smell of summer. When she set it on the table after dinner, grown men actually stood up in surprise. "Is that—" Hayes started. "Peach cobbler," Evelyn confirmed. "Courtesy of Mr. Vale." Every eye turned to Rowan, who shifted uncomfortably under the attention. "Don't make a fuss," he muttered. "Just eat." They ate in reverent silence, savoring every bite like it might be their last taste of sweetness for months, because it probably would be. Afterward, Marcus raised his coffee cup in an impromptu toast. To the boss for sharing what must have been hard to let go. And to Mrs. Mercer for making this godforsaken mountain feel like home. "Hear, hear," the men chorused. The meant. Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. These hard-weathered men who dismissed her on sight were now calling this place home because of her presence. The realization settled into her chest with a weight that felt both overwhelming and exactly right. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Rowan found her in the kitchen as usual. But instead of standing apart, he moved close and wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Merry Christmas, Evelyn." She leaned back into his warmth. "Merry Christmas. I never thought I'd celebrate this day again. Not really celebrate it." "What changed?" "You did." He turned her to face him. "You walked into my frozen existence and refused to let me stay buried in it. You challenged me, pushed me, made me remember what it felt like to care about something beyond just survival." Evelyn reached up and touched his face, feeling the rough stubble under her palm. "You gave me back my purpose, when the whole world said I was worthless. That's not something I'll ever forget." They stood together in the quiet kitchen, holding each other against the winter darkness, and for those few precious moments, nothing else existed except the warmth they'd built between them. But peace never lasted long on the frontier. The storm hit 3 days after Christmas, with a violence that made previous snowfalls look gentle. Wind screamed down from the peaks like something alive and furious, driving snow horizontal, turning the world into a whiteout so complete that Evelyn couldn't see the bunkhouse from the main house windows. The temperature plummeted. Ice formed in geometric patterns on every surface. The men huddled in the bunkhouse with every stove burning, wrapped in every blanket they owned, and still the cold found ways to seep through walls and floors. On the second day of the storm, the main chimney started smoking badly. Rowan went up to check it despite the blizzard and came back with grim news. Blockage. Ice buildup, maybe a bird's nest that froze solid. The flue's nearly shut. He stripped off his ice-crusted coat. "If we can't clear it, we lose the main stove. And if we lose the main stove in this cold—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Without heat, the main house would become uninhabitable. The kitchen would shut down. The men would have nothing but what they could cook on the bunkhouse stove, which wasn't designed to feed 20 people. "Can you clear it?" Evelyn asked. "I'll have to go on the roof. In this wind." Rowan's expression was grim. "Not exactly safe." "Then wait until the storm passes. Storm's supposed to last another 3 days at least. We can't go that long without the kitchen stove." Coleman, who'd come over to help assess the situation, shook his head. "Boss, that roof's going to be slick as glass. Wind's strong enough to knock a man clean off. You go up there now, you're asking to break your neck." "You have a better idea?" "Yeah, we wait." "We can't wait." "Then let me go," Coleman said. "I'm bigger, heavier. Wind won't push me around as easy." Rowan started to argue, but Evelyn cut him off. "No, neither of you goes up there, not in this." Both men turned to stare at her. "Evelyn," Rowan started, "I mean it. We'll manage with the bunkhouse stove. I'll cook in shifts, make it work somehow. But I won't watch either of you risk dying for a chimney." "The ranch needs that stove," Rowan said flatly. "The ranch needs you alive more than it needs a working chimney." They locked eyes, neither willing to back down. The air between them crackled with tension, his stubborn determination meeting her equally stubborn refusal to let him endanger himself. Finally, Coleman cleared his throat. "How about a compromise? We wait until morning. If the wind dies down even a little, I go up with a safety rope. The boss anchors me from below. If the wind's still bad, we wait another day." It wasn't perfect, but it was better than Rowan climbing onto an ice-covered roof in hurricane-force winds right now. "Fine," Rowan said grudgingly, "but if the wind drops before morning, we do it then." That night, Evelyn lay awake in her small room listening to the storm rage. The walls shook with each gust. Snow forced its way through cracks around the window. The cold was so intense she could see her breath even wrapped in every blanket she owned. She thought about Rowan in the main house, probably not sleeping either, probably running through scenarios in his mind, trying to find solutions to impossible problems. She thought about the men in the bunkhouse, trusting that somehow the people in charge would keep them safe and fed through this nightmare. And she thought about how fragile everything was, how quickly warmth could turn to cold, safety to danger, life to death. They were all balanced on a knife's edge up here, one disaster away from catastrophe. Somewhere near midnight, the wind shifted. Evelyn heard the change immediately, the howl dropping in pitch, the shaking walls growing steadier. She sat up, hope and dread warring in her chest. If the wind had dropped, Rowan would insist on clearing the chimney immediately. She dressed quickly and ran across to the main house, fighting through snow that had drifted nearly 3 feet deep against the doors. Inside, she found Rowan already awake, standing at the window with a coil of rope in his hands. "Don't," she said. He turned to look at her. "The wind's dropped. It's still too dangerous. It's the best chance we'll get." He moved toward her, his face gentle but determined. "Evelyn, I know you're frightened, but this is what I do. I make the hard calls. I take the necessary risks. It's how I've kept this place running for 15 years. And what happens if you fall? What happens to the ranch then? To the men? To—" She stopped, unable to finish. "To you?" Rowan said softly. He cupped her face in his hands. "Nothing's going to happen to me. I'll be careful. Coleman will have the rope. I'll be up and down in 20 minutes. "You can't promise that." "No, but I can promise I won't take stupid chances. And I can promise that if I thought there was any other way, I'd take it." Evelyn wanted to argue more, wanted to physically prevent him from going outside. But she could see in his eyes that he'd already made his decision. This was who he was, the man who carried the weight of responsibility even when it might crush him. 20 minutes, she said, her voice breaking. "That's all you get. If you're not down in 20 minutes, I'm coming up after you." Despite everything, Rowan smiled. "Deal." She followed him outside where Coleman was already waiting with more rope and a lantern that barely penetrated the swirling snow. "Ready, boss?" Coleman asked. "Ready." They worked with practiced efficiency, Coleman securing the safety rope around Rowan's chest, tying the other end to one of the heavy porch supports. Rowan tested the knots himself, then grabbed the ladder they'd positioned against the house. "Be careful," Evelyn said, hating how helpless she felt. Rowan paused on the first rung and looked back at her. "I will, I promise." Then he started climbing. Evelyn watched him ascend into the darkness, the lantern light turning him into a ghost moving through falling snow. Her heart hammered so hard she thought her ribs might crack. Every second felt like an hour. Coleman held the rope steady, playing it out as Rowan climbed higher. "He's done this before," Coleman said, whether to reassure Evelyn or himself wasn't clear. "Knows what he's doing." Evelyn said nothing. She just watched that distant light, praying to anything that might be listening that Rowan would come back down safely. The minutes crawled past. 5, 10, 15. Then from above they heard the sound of metal scraping against brick. Rowan had reached the chimney and was working to clear the blockage. More scraping, the muffled sound of something hitting the roof. Rowan's voice, too distant to make out words, swallowed by the wind. Then silence. "Rowan?" Evelyn called up, no response. "Boss!" Coleman shouted louder. Still nothing. Evelyn's blood turned to ice. "Something's wrong. Give him a minute. Something's wrong." She grabbed the ladder, already starting to climb. Coleman caught her arm. "Wait, let me check the rope first." He gave the safety rope a testing tug. It held firm, no alarming slack that would indicate Rowan had fallen. "Rope's good," Coleman said. "He's probably just—" "Rowan!" Evelyn screamed his name with every ounce of air in her lungs. This time, faintly, they heard a response. "I'm okay, just—" The wind snatched the rest of his words away. Relief flooded through Evelyn so powerfully her knees nearly buckled. 2 minutes later, Rowan appeared at the roof's edge and started back down the ladder. His descent seemed to take forever, each rung a separate eternity. But finally his boots touched solid ground. Evelyn threw herself at him, not caring that he was covered in snow and ice, not caring that Coleman was watching with barely concealed amusement. "Don't ever do that again," she said into his chest. Rowan wrapped his arms around her, holding tight. "Chimney's clear. Stove should work fine now. I don't care about the stove." "I know." He pulled back to look at her face. "I'm sorry I scared you." "You're impossible." "So I've been told." Coleman coughed diplomatically. "I'll just go test that stove, shall I?" After he disappeared inside, Rowan and Evelyn stood together in the storm-torn night, clinging to each other. "I thought I'd lost you," Evelyn whispered. "You didn't. I'm right here. But I could have, so easily. One gust of wind, one patch of ice." She couldn't finish. Rowan tilted her face up to his. "Evelyn, I can't promise that nothing will ever happen to me. This life, this place, it's dangerous. People die in these mountains all the time, from storms or accidents or just bad luck. But I can promise that I'll fight like hell to come back to you every single time. That's not enough. It's all I have." She knew he was right. The frontier didn't offer guarantees. It offered only the chance to fight for what mattered and hope that was enough. "Then it'll have to do," she said. They went inside together, and Coleman had been right. The stove was working perfectly now, heat pouring from it like a blessing. That night, for the first time, Rowan didn't leave after their evening conversation. He stayed in the kitchen with Evelyn, and they fell asleep in chairs pulled close to the stove, hands clasped between them, while outside the storm continued its assault on the mountain. When morning came, the storm had finally blown itself out. The world lay buried under snow that sparkled in weak sunlight, pristine and deadly beautiful. The men emerged from the bunkhouse like survivors crawling from a shipwreck, blinking in the brightness, assessing damage. Miraculously, they'd lost nothing critical. Some fencing was down. A small outbuilding had partially collapsed, but the main structures stood, the animals had survived, and everyone was accounted for. "Could have been worse," Marcus said, surveying the devastation. "Could have been a lot worse." The days following the big storm brought a strange calm to Iron Ridge. The men worked to repair damage, the weather held relatively steady, and supplies continued to stretch further than they had any right to. Evelyn's careful rationing and creative cooking kept everyone fed, if not exactly satisfied, but tension was building in other ways. One afternoon in early January, Danny approached Evelyn in the kitchen with obvious nervousness. "Mrs. Mercer, can I ask you something?" "Of course." He twisted his hat in his hands. "It's about, well, it's personal." Evelyn set down her knife and gave him her full attention. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong exactly. It's just—" He took a deep breath. "There's a girl in Black Hollow, Sarah. I met her during the supply run. She works at the general store, and I think I might want to court her properly, but I don't know how. I'm not. He stumbled over the words, his face turning red. Evelyn felt her heart soften. You've never courted anyone before? No, ma'am, and I don't want to mess it up. She's real special. Tell me about her. Danny's face lit up. She's smart, really smart. Keeps the store's books, knows every item they stock, can tell you the price of anything without looking it up. And she's funny. Made me laugh even when I was half frozen and miserable. And when she smiles, he stopped, embarrassed. You want to see that smile again? Evelyn finished gently. Yes, ma'am. She thought about her own youth, about the awkward early days with Thomas, when neither of them had known how to talk to each other without blushing. Here's what you do, she said. Next time you're in Black Hollow, you bring her something small, not expensive. You don't want to seem like you're trying to buy her affection. Something thoughtful, something that shows you were paying attention. Like what? Did she mention anything she liked, anything she wanted? Danny thought hard. She said the store ran out of good writing paper. Said she liked to write letters to her sister in Denver, but had to use old receipt backs because they couldn't get more stock until spring. Perfect. Find some decent writing paper, just a small bundle. Bring it to her and say you thought she might need it. Evelyn smiled. Trust me, thoughtfulness matters more than grand gestures. Danny nodded eagerly, committing every word to memory. Thank you, Mrs. Mercer. I knew you'd know what to do. After he left, Rowan appeared in the doorway, having clearly overheard at least part of the conversation. Giving romantic advice now? He asked, amusement in his voice. Someone has to. These men are hopeless. Are they? He moved closer. What would you advise me to do if I wanted to court someone? Evelyn's pulse quickened. Are you courting someone, Mr. Vale? I'm considering it, but I'm not sure I'm doing it right. He stopped directly in front of her. I'm not good with words, never have been, and I don't know how to do this, the proper way, the way a woman deserves. What have you been doing so far? Talking to her every night, thinking about her constantly, nearly breaking my neck clearing chimneys because I can't stand the thought of her being cold. He paused, falling in love with her even though I swore I'd never let myself feel that way again. Evelyn's breath caught. Rowan, I love you, Evelyn. The words came out rough but certain. I fought it, told myself it was too soon, too complicated, too risky, but I can't fight it anymore. You've become the center of everything, and I need you to know that. Tears spilled down Evelyn's cheeks before she could stop them. I love you too. I think I have since that first night when you gave me 7 days. Maybe even before that, when you looked at me like I was worth taking a chance on. Rowan pulled her close, and they stood together in the warm kitchen, holding each other like they could merge into one person if they just held tight enough. Marry me, Rowan said against her hair. Evelyn pulled back to look at him. What? Marry me. Not because the ranch needs a cook, not because we're both lonely. Marry me because I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. Because I want to build something with you that's ours, not just surviving together, but actually living. Rowan, She struggled to find words. Are you sure? We've known each other for barely 3 months. I was married to Catherine for 8 years before she died. I knew her, loved her, built a life with her. But in 3 months with you, I've felt more alive than I did in all those years. He cupped her face. I'm not replacing her. You could never replace her. But I'm choosing you, choosing us, choosing to believe that maybe life gives second chances to people brave enough to take them. Evelyn thought about the journey that had brought her here, the loss, the rejection, the desperate walk into the mountains with nothing but a wooden spoon and stubborn refusal to disappear. She thought about the woman she'd been, invisible and dismissed, and the woman she'd become, essential and valued. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. Rowan kissed her then, deep and thorough, pouring everything he felt into that single moment of connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Evelyn laughed, a sound of pure joy that felt almost foreign after so many months of grief. The men are going to have opinions, she said. Let them. They'll just have to get used to you being the boss's wife. I was already running half this place anyway. Exactly. Rowan grinned, a real unguarded expression that made him look years younger. So really, this is just making it official. That night at dinner, Rowan stood at the head of the table and cleared his throat for attention. The men fell silent immediately, sensing something important. I have an announcement, Rowan said. Mrs. Mercer has agreed to marry me. We'll have the ceremony as soon as we can get a preacher up here in the spring. For one shocked moment, no one moved. Then Coleman started laughing, a deep, booming sound of genuine happiness. About damn time, boss. The table erupted. Men cheered, clapped, pounded the table with their fists. Marcus stood and raised his coffee cup. To the boss and Mrs. Mercer, may they find all the happiness they deserve. Here, here, the men shouted. Danny came around the table to shake Rowan's hand vigorously, then turned to Evelyn with tears in his eyes. I'm real happy for you, ma'am. You both deserve this. Even Hayes and Peters, usually reserved, offered congratulations with genuine warmth. Evelyn stood there overwhelmed by the celebration, by these hard men who'd become her family, by the realization that she'd found something here in the frozen mountains she never expected to find again. She'd found home. Later that night, after the excitement had died down and the men had gone to bed, Evelyn stood at her window looking out at the star-filled sky. Behind her, she heard the door open. Rowan entered carrying a bundle of blankets. Thought you might need these. Temperature's dropping again. Thank you. He set them on the bed, then hesitated. I should go. Wouldn't be proper, me being in your room now that we're engaged. Evelyn turned to face him. Since when do we care about proper? Since I want to do this right. Want to honor you the way you deserve. She crossed to him and took his hands. You honor me every day just by seeing me, by choosing me. That's more than enough. They stood together in the small room, the future spreading before them, full of uncertainty and promise in equal measure. Outside, the winter darkness pressed close, but inside Iron Ridge Ranch, warmth burned bright against the cold, fed by love that had grown from nothing, from rejection and grief, from two broken people who'd found unexpected wholeness in each other. And somewhere in that warmth, hope took root and began to grow. January melted into February, and with it came a subtle but undeniable shift in the mountain air. The worst of winter's fury had passed, though snow still fell and cold still bit deep. But now there were moments, brief, precious moments, when the sun broke through clouds with actual warmth, when icicles dripped from roof edges, when the promise of spring whispered through the valleys like a secret not yet ready to be told. Evelyn marked the passage of days not by calendar, but by changes in the ranch itself. The men worked with renewed energy, their movements less about mere survival and more about preparation for the season ahead. They repaired fencing with an eye toward spring calving. They inventoried equipment and made lists of supplies needed once the trails cleared. They talked about the future in voices that held hope instead of just grim determination. And through it all, Evelyn cooked and planned and dreamed about the wedding that would come when winter finally released its grip. But peace, she was learning, was always temporary on the frontier. The trouble started on a Wednesday in mid-February when a stranger rode into Iron Ridge just before sunset. He was young, maybe 25, with the kind of polished appearance that marked him as someone from towns, not mountains. His horse was well-bred, his coat expensive, his boots barely broken in. Rowan met him in the yard, Evelyn watching from the kitchen window. "Help you?" Rowan asked, his voice carrying the cool wariness of a man who knew unexpected visitors rarely brought good news. The stranger dismounted with the careful movements of someone sore from long riding. "Are you Rowan Vale?" "I am." "My name is Thomas Hendricks. I'm an attorney from Kansas City, representing the estate of Samuel Grant." Evelyn's blood turned cold at the name. Samuel Grant, the bank agent who'd taken her cabin, who destroyed her life back in Missouri, with papers and debts and cold indifference. Rowan's posture shifted, becoming more alert. "What business does a Kansas City attorney have at my ranch?" "May we speak inside? This conversation requires privacy." Rowan glanced toward the kitchen, saw Evelyn in the window, and something in his expression softened. "Whatever you have to say, you can say in front of my men and my fiancée." Hendricks hesitated, then nodded. "Very well. Mr. Grant passed away 3 weeks ago. In settling his estate, certain irregularities came to light. Documents that weren't properly filed, loans that may have been—" He paused, choosing words carefully. "Fraudulent." Evelyn's hands gripped the windowsill so hard her knuckles went white. "What does this have to do with Iron Ridge?" Rowan demanded. "Nothing directly, but I'm searching for a woman named Evelyn Mercer. Mr. Grant's records indicate he seized property from her last November based on a loan supposedly taken out by her deceased husband. However, no such loan can be found in any legitimate banking records. It appears Mr. Grant may have fabricated the debt entirely." The world tilted sideways. Evelyn pushed open the kitchen door and walked out into the fading light, her legs somehow still carrying her even though she felt like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. "I'm Evelyn Mercer," she said. Hendricks turned to look at her, his professional demeanor softening slightly. "Mrs. Mercer, I've been searching for you for 2 weeks. The people in your former town said you'd left, but no one knew where you'd gone." "They didn't care where I went," Evelyn corrected, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her chest. "What do you mean the loan was fabricated?" Mr. Grant was dying of consumption. In his final days, he apparently suffered attacks of conscience and confessed to his wife that he'd falsified several loans over the years, taking properties from vulnerable people who couldn't fight back. Your cabin was one of them. There was no debt. Your husband never borrowed anything. Mr. Grant simply wanted your property. The words hit Evelyn like physical blows. No debt. No loan. Thomas hadn't betrayed her trust or hidden financial disasters. He'd been exactly who she thought he was. A good man who'd died too young, leaving her alone but not deceived. And her home. The cabin where she'd built a life, where she'd buried a daughter, where every wall held memories, had been stolen based on lies. Why? The question came out broken. Why would he do that? Hendricks looked uncomfortable. According to his widow, he partnered with a land speculator named Clayton Marks. They identified properties owned by people who couldn't fight legal battles: widows, immigrants, the elderly. Grant would fabricate loans, seize the properties, and Marks would buy them cheap and resell them for profit. They split the proceeds. Evelyn remembered Clayton Marks's smile the day they told her to leave, the way he'd looked at her cabin like he was already counting the money it would bring him. "That cabin is legally yours, Mrs. Mercer," Hendricks continued. "Grant's widow has agreed to return all fraudulently seized properties as part of settling his estate. If you'll return to Missouri with me, we can arrange for immediate restoration of your ownership. Return to Missouri, to the valley that had rejected her, to the cabin that held ghosts of everything she'd lost." Evelyn looked at the attorney standing there with his papers and his legal remedy, offering her back the life that had been stolen. Then she looked at Rowan, at this hard, damaged man who'd given her a chance when she had nothing, who'd loved her when she thought no one ever would again. "No," she said quietly. Hendricks blinked. "I'm sorry?" "I said no. I don't want the cabin back." "Mrs. Mercer, I don't think you understand. This property is rightfully yours, and it's worth a substantial sum. You could sell it, use the money to—" "To what?" Evelyn interrupted. "Go back to a town that watched me starve without lifting a finger? Sleep in a house that's empty of everyone I loved? Pretend the last 4 months didn't happen? I'm simply trying to restore what was taken from you." "You can't restore what was taken from me," Evelyn said, her voice gaining strength. "My husband is dead. My daughter is dead. The life I had in that valley died long before Samuel Grant forged papers to steal my cabin. Going back won't change any of that." Rowan stepped closer to her, his presence solid and steadying. "What do you want, Evelyn?" She looked up at him and felt absolute certainty settle into her bones. "I want to stay here. I want to marry you. I want to build a life at Iron Ridge with people who see me as more than just a burden or a problem to be solved." "The cabin," Hendricks started, "can be sold," Evelyn said firmly. "Whatever money it brings can go to Grant's widow or charity or anyone who needs it more than I do. I don't want anything from that place. I don't want any connection to the people who let me walk into these mountains to die." Hendricks looked genuinely shocked. "Mrs. Mercer, we're talking about significant value. Enough money to secure your future, provide independence." "I have independence," Evelyn said. "I have a future, right here." The attorney glanced between Evelyn and Rowan, clearly trying to understand how anyone could turn down money and property. Finally, he sighed and pulled papers from his satchel. "If you're certain, I'll need you to sign documents releasing all claim to the property. And there's the matter of compensation for the wrongful seizure. Even if you don't want the cabin, you're entitled to damages. How much? Rowan asked. Hendricks named a figure that made Evelyn's head spin. More money than she'd seen in her entire life. More money than she'd ever imagined having. Take it, Rowan said quietly. Not because you need it, but because you earned it. Because they stole from you, and this is justice. Evelyn thought about Samuel Grant on his deathbed, finally facing the weight of what he'd done. She thought about all the people he'd hurt, all the lives he'd destroyed with his greed. I'll take half, she said. The other half goes to finding the other people he defrauded and making them whole. Can you do that? Hendricks smiled for the first time. I can. That's very generous, Mrs. Mercer. It's not generosity. It's making sure his crimes actually get fixed instead of just swept away. They completed the paperwork by lamplight in the main house, Rowan and Coleman serving as witnesses. Hendricks promised to handle the sale of the cabin and ensure the money reached Evelyn within 2 months. You'll need a bank account, he said. I can recommend several in Denver that she'll use Iron Ridge accounts, Rowan interrupted. She's going to be my wife. What's mine is hers. Hendricks nodded and made notes. Then he looked at Evelyn with something like admiration. Mrs. Mercer, I've been practicing law for 6 years. I've seen people destroy families fighting over far less money than you just gave away. You're a remarkable woman. I'm a practical woman, Evelyn corrected. Money can't buy back the dead or erase the past, but it can help people who are still fighting. That's worth more than anything I could buy for myself. After Hendricks left the next morning, promising to send all final documents within the month, Evelyn stood in the kitchen feeling like she'd closed a door on a part of her life that had been holding her back without her realizing it. Rowan found her there, staring at nothing, lost in thought. Regrets? He asked. No. Relief. She turned to face him. I didn't realize how much I was still carrying from that place until I let it go. The anger, the hurt, the feeling that I'd been thrown away like garbage. It's been weighing me down this whole time. And now? Now I'm free. She moved into his arms, completely free. Nothing tying me to who I was before. Nothing pulling me backward. Just forward, just this. Rowan held her close. I'm proud of you. What you did, giving that money away, that took strength most people don't have. I learned it from you, from the men, from everyone here who keeps choosing to fight even when it would be easier to quit. They stood together in the warm kitchen while outside the February wind blew, carrying the first real hints of spring thaw. But the universe, it seemed, had one more test for Iron Ridge Ranch. The fire started 3 weeks later, on a night that began calm and ended in chaos. Evelyn woke to the sound of men shouting and horses screaming. She bolted upright, disoriented, her heart already hammering before her mind fully grasped that something was catastrophically wrong. Then she smelled smoke. She threw open her door and saw flames, massive, roaring flames, consuming the hay barn at the far end of the ranch yard. The structure was completely engulfed, fire climbing into the night sky like something alive and hungry. Men poured from the bunkhouse in various states of undress, grabbing buckets, organizing into lines, shouting orders that were barely audible over the roar of burning wood and hay. Evelyn ran toward this chaos, her mind already cataloging what was in that barn. Winter hay for the cattle, spare tack, tools, equipment worth more than most people earned in a year. But more importantly, the barn sat dangerously close to the main stable. If the fire spread there, they'd lose the horses. And without horses, the ranch couldn't function. They'd be crippled, maybe destroyed. She found Rowan near the front of the bucket line, his face lit by firelight, shouting directions. But something was wrong. His movements were jerky, uncertain. His eyes kept fixing on the flames with an expression of absolute terror. Evelyn recognized that look. She'd seen it the night he'd told her about Catherine, about watching her die in flames while he stood helpless. He was freezing. The fire was dragging him back to the worst moment of his life, and he was losing the battle to stay present. "Rowan!" she shouted, grabbing his arm. He looked at her but didn't seem to see her. His face was pale, his breathing rapid and shallow. "The horses," he said, his voice distant. "Catherine went in for the horses. I couldn't. The roof." "Rowan, listen to me." Evelyn gripped his face in both hands, forcing him to focus on her instead of the flames. "This is not that fire. Catherine is not in there. But our horses are, and they need you. The men need you. I need you. Come back to me, right now. For a terrible moment, she thought she'd lost him to the past. Then something shifted behind his eyes. He blinked, focused on her face, and she watched him claw his way back to the present through sheer force of will. The horses, he said again, but this time his voice was steady. Yes, what do we do? Rowan turned to survey the scene with sudden clarity. The hay barn was lost. No saving it now. But the main stable was still untouched. If they could keep the fire from spreading, they might save everything else. Coleman, Rowan shouted, get every available man on bucket lines between the hay barn and the stable. Soak the stable walls. Peters, Hayes, get the horses out and move them to the far pasture. Danny, you're with me. We're going to tear down the fence connecting the two buildings so there's no direct path for the flames. The men moved instantly, responding to the authority in his voice. Evelyn started to head for the bucket line, but Rowan caught her arm. No, you organize supplies, water, bandages, food for when this is over. Someone needs to make sure we have what we need to keep going. I can help fight the fire. You can help by doing what you do best, managing resources, thinking ahead, being the backbone that holds everything together. He squeezed her hand. Trust me. She did. So she ran back to the kitchen and began preparing for a battle that would last until dawn. The next hours were a blur of smoke and fire and desperate work. Evelyn set up a supply station near the well, keeping fresh water flowing to the bucket lines, preparing bandages for burns, making quick food that men could grab and eat without stopping work. She watched Rowan and Danny attack the connecting fence with axes, tearing it down to create a fire break. Watched Coleman lead one bucket line with ruthless efficiency. Watched Peters and Hayes get every horse safely evacuated, then returned to help fight the flames. The men worked with single-minded intensity, knowing that their entire future balanced on whether they could contain this disaster. At one point, Marcus staggered away from the line with his hands blistered from hot bucket handles. Evelyn was there immediately, treating the burns with cool water and clean cloth. Get back to work as soon as you can, she told him. We need every hand. Marcus looked at her with exhausted admiration. You're something else, Mrs. Mercer. Most women would be screaming or fainting. You're out here treating wounds like a field surgeon. Most women haven't been to hell and back, Evelyn said. Fire doesn't scare me anymore. Losing what we've built. That scares me. She sent him back to the lines and turned to find the next person who needed help. Somewhere around 3 a.m, the tide turned. The hay barn collapsed in on itself, the flames feeding on the wreckage but no longer spreading outward. The bucket lines had successfully soaked the stable walls enough that the fire couldn't gain purchase. The fire break held. By dawn, the fire was out. The hay barn was gone, nothing left but smoking rubble and twisted metal. But the stable stood intact. The horses were safe. The ranch had survived. Men collapsed where they stood, too exhausted to make it back to the bunkhouse. Evelyn moved among them with water and food, checking for injuries, offering what comfort she could. She found Rowan sitting alone near the ruined barn, staring at the smoke still rising from the ashes. You did it, she said, sitting beside him. You saved everything that mattered. We did it, he corrected. All of us. He turned to look at her, his face blackened with soot, his eyes red-rimmed from smoke. I froze. When I first saw the flames, I completely froze. If you hadn't pulled me back, but I did. That's what we do. We pull each other back when the past tries to swallow us whole. Rowan reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. I thought I was over it. The fire, Catherine, all of it. But tonight proved I'm still carrying it, still broken by it. You're not broken, Evelyn said firmly. You're scarred. There's a difference. Scars don't make you weak. They prove you survived something that should have destroyed you. And tonight you survived it again. You came back when I called you. You led these men through hell. That's not broken, Rowan. That's strength. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. I don't know what I did to deserve you. You gave a desperate widow, with nothing but a wooden spoon, 7 days to prove herself. That's what you did. They sat together while the sun rose over the mountain peaks, painting the smoke-stained world in shades of gold and pink. Around them, exhausted men began to stir, assessing damage, planning recovery. Coleman approached, his massive frame somehow looking diminished by exhaustion. Boss? We need to talk about the hay situation. Rowan stood, helping Evelyn up. How bad? We lost about 60% of our winter reserves. What's left will get us through maybe another month if we ration carefully. After that, Coleman shrugged, we'll need to buy hay or start early grazing, which risks the cattle if another late storm hits. Can we afford to buy that much hay? Evelyn asked. Rowan's jaw tightened. Not easily. It'll drain our operating reserves, put us in a tight position if anything else goes wrong. Evelyn thought about the money from the cabin sale, the compensation for what Samuel Grant had stolen. It wouldn't arrive for another month, but when it did, we use my money, she said. Both men turned to stare at her. The settlement from Missouri. It'll be here within a month. We use it to buy hay, replace equipment, cover whatever we need to keep the ranch running. Evelyn, that's your money, Rowan protested. Your independence, your security, if what? If you die? If the ranch fails? If I end up alone again? She stepped closer to him. Rowan, I chose this place. I chose you. That means I choose to invest in our future together. The money doesn't mean anything sitting in a bank, but used to save Iron Ridge, used to protect what we're building, that means everything. It's a lot of money to risk, Coleman said quietly. Everything worth having requires risk. Evelyn looked between them. Besides, this isn't really about money. It's about proving that we're stronger than disasters, that fire can't destroy us, that we adapt and survive and come back stronger than before. Rowan studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, but on one condition, we use it as a loan. When the ranch recovers, when we're profitable again, we pay back every cent to our joint accounts. This is an investment in our future, not a sacrifice of yours. Agreed? Agreed. Coleman cleared his throat. Well then, guess I better start making lists of what we need. This is going to be a hell of a recovery effort. After he left, Rowan pulled Evelyn close. Thank you. For what? For seeing a future here worth fighting for. For believing in this place and these people when you had every reason to walk away. I tried walking away once, Evelyn said. It nearly killed me. I'm not making that mistake again. The weeks following the fire were harder than anything Evelyn had experienced at Iron Ridge. The men worked from before dawn until after dark, clearing rubble, salvaging what could be saved, planning reconstruction. Supplies had to be carefully rationed again. Every decision carried weight. But something had changed in the ranch's spirit. The fire had burned away the last vestiges of the emotional deadness that had haunted Iron Ridge since Catherine's death. The men weren't just surviving anymore. They were building, creating, looking forward instead of just enduring the present. Danny made a trip to Black Hollow in March and returned with not only supplies, but also news that Sarah had agreed to let him court her properly. He was so happy he practically glowed. She said yes, he announced to the entire bunkhouse. She actually said yes. The men cheered like he'd won a major victory, and in a way, he had. Peters and Hayes began planning how they'd spend their wages when the ranch became profitable again. Coleman started teaching the younger hands skills they'd need to move up from basic labor to management positions. Marcus carved a wooden spoon for Evelyn to replace the one she'd given Danny for luck, with Iron Ridge burned into the handle. The ranch was transforming from a collection of isolated men doing hard work into something that felt like family. March melted into April, and with it came the money from Missouri. True to her word, Evelyn immediately put most of it toward ranch operations. They bought hay, replaced burned equipment, hired additional hands for the reconstruction effort. The new hay barn began to rise where the old one had fallen, bigger and better designed, with stone fire barriers built into the structure. If it burns again, it'll have to work a lot harder to do it, Rowan said, surveying the construction. It won't burn again, Evelyn said with certainty. We've had our disaster. Now we get our reward. She was right. By early May, the barn was complete, and the ranch was running smoother than it had in years. The cattle had survived winter in good condition. Spring calving went well. Every metric pointed to a profitable year ahead. And one morning in mid-May, when the valley was green and wildflowers covered the meadows in sheets of purple and gold, a traveling preacher arrived at Iron Ridge. Heard you might be needing my services, he said with a kind smile. Fella named Cade sent word to look you folks up. Rowan and Evelyn exchanged glances. Cade, the old trail scout who'd sent Evelyn to Iron Ridge in the first place, who'd seen something in her that no one else had. "We're getting married," Rowan told the preacher. "If you're willing to perform the ceremony, be honored to." They held the wedding 3 days later in the valley below the ranch, with the mountains standing witness and wildflowers growing thick underfoot. Evelyn wore a simple dress, not new, but clean and mended with care. She carried a bouquet of mountain wildflowers that Danny had picked that morning. Her hair was pulled back simply, and she wore no jewelry except a plain silver ring Rowan had commissioned from the blacksmith in Black Hollow. Rowan wore his best clothes, his dark hair combed back, his gray eyes holding warmth and love instead of the cold distance that had defined him for so long. Every ranch hand attended, cleaned up and dressed in their finest. Even Sarah came from Black Hollow, standing beside Danny with a smile that explained exactly why the young man had fallen for her. The preacher kept the ceremony short and simple, speaking about commitment and partnership, about two people choosing to build something together in hard country. When he asked if Rowan would take Evelyn as his wife, Rowan's voice was strong and clear. "I will, for as long as we both live." And when he asked if Evelyn would take Rowan as her husband, she looked at this man who'd given her back her life and said, "I will, through everything, no matter what comes." They exchanged rings under the mountain sky, while the men cheered and Sarah cried happy tears, and somewhere in the distance, cattle grazed peacefully on spring grass. The kiss was sweet and tender and full of promise, not just for them, but for everything they represented. Two broken people who'd found wholeness in each other. Two survivors who'd chosen to live instead of just exist. When they finally separated, Coleman shouted, "About time!" and everyone laughed. That night they held a celebration feast that lasted until the stars came out. Evelyn had cooked for days preparing food, and the men ate like it might be their last meal on Earth. There was music. Hayes played fiddle, and Peters had a surprisingly good singing voice. People danced in the firelight, and the mountains echoed with laughter. Late in the evening, Evelyn found herself standing apart from the celebration, looking up at Iron Ridge Ranch silhouetted against the darkening sky. Marcus appeared beside her. "Quite a journey, Mrs. Vale." She smiled at the name. Mrs. Vale. Not Mrs. Mercer anymore. A new identity for a new life. "It is," she agreed, "from losing everything to finding more than I ever imagined." "You know what the men say about you?" Marcus asked. "I'm almost afraid to know. They say you're the toughest person on this ranch. Tougher than the boss, tougher than Coleman, tougher than any of us. Because you walked into these mountains with nothing and refused to disappear. You looked at all of us broken men in this hard place and decided we were worth saving. That takes a kind of strength most people don't have." Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. "I wasn't trying to save anyone. I was just trying to survive. That's what makes it real strength. You weren't trying to be a hero. You were just refusing to give up, and somehow that changed everything." Rowan appeared from the crowd, wrapping his arms around Evelyn from behind. "There you are. Thought you'd run off on our wedding night." "Never," Evelyn said, leaning back into his warmth. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Marcus excused himself diplomatically, leaving them alone under the stars. "Are you happy?" Rowan asked quietly. Evelyn thought about the question carefully. Happiness felt too small a word for what she felt. She felt complete, purposeful. Like every terrible thing that had happened to her had been leading her to this moment, this place, this life. "I'm more than happy," she said. "I'm home." They stood together watching their ranch, their family, celebrate below them. The new hay barn stood strong against the night sky. The mountains rose eternal and unchanging. The stars burned cold and distant overhead. But here, in this valley, warmth and life and hope burned bright. The woman who'd walked into the frozen wilderness with nothing but a wooden spoon and stubborn will had transformed an entire community. She'd brought life back to a ranch that had been slowly dying. She'd helped broken men remember how to be whole. She'd loved a grieving widower back into the world of the living. And in return, she'd found the one thing she thought she'd lost forever, the certainty that she mattered, that her existence had value beyond what she could offer others, that she deserved love and home and family. Winter would come again, storms would test them, disasters would strike. The frontier would continue to be harsh and unforgiving. But Iron Ridge Ranch would stand, because it wasn't just buildings and cattle and hard work anymore. It was family. It was love. It was home. And families, Evelyn had learned, could survive anything as long as they refused to give up on each other. Spring turned to summer, and the ranch prospered beyond anyone's expectations. The cattle sold for record prices. New hands were hired. Danny and Sarah became engaged, planning a wedding for the fall. Coleman started talking about maybe saving enough to buy his own small spread someday. Marcus became the unofficial grandfather of the operation, teaching younger men and keeping everyone honest. And Rowan and Evelyn built their life together with the same careful attention Evelyn brought to cooking. One day at a time, one decision at a time, choosing love and partnership over fear and isolation. On a warm evening in late August, they sat together on the porch of the main house, watching the sunset over the mountains. "Do you ever miss Missouri?" Rowan asked. Evelyn thought about it honestly. "I miss what it represented, the life I had with Thomas, the dreams we built together. But that world is gone, and I wouldn't trade what I have now for anything, even if I could go back." "Not even the easy parts? The settled life, the community, the certainty of knowing where you belonged?" "I have all that here. Better versions of it, actually, because I chose this. I fought for this. It's mine in a way that other life never really was." Rowan took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "I used to think Catherine's death was the end of everything good in my life, that I'd never feel whole again, never want anything beyond just getting through each day. And then a widow with a cracked cooking pot and a wooden spoon walked into my ranch and refused to let me stay frozen in grief. I was just trying to survive." "You did more than survive. You lived, fully, fearlessly, in a way that reminded the rest of us how to do the same." He turned to face her. "I love you, Evelyn Vale, more than I thought I could love anyone after Catherine, and I'm grateful every single day that you walked into these mountains instead of giving up." Evelyn kissed him softly. "I love you too, and I'm grateful you saw something worth saving in a desperate woman who had nothing to offer but stubbornness and the ability to cook. You had everything to offer, you just didn't know it yet." They sat together as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple, the mountains standing eternal watch over the valley that had become their kingdom. Below them, the ranch hummed with evening activity. Cattle settling for the night, horses whinnying in the stable, men's voices carrying from the bunkhouse in easy conversation. Everything they'd built, everything they'd saved, everything they'd become. And somewhere in the deepening twilight, if you listened carefully, you might have heard the sound of a wooden spoon tapping against a pot, the rhythm of survival, of stubbornness, of a woman who'd refused to disappear even when the whole world had tried to make her invisible. That woman had walked through fire and cold and rejection and loss. She'd climbed mountains, literally and figuratively, that should have destroyed her. But she hadn't been destroyed. She'd been transformed. From widow to cook to wife to the heart of an entire frontier community. From invisible to essential. From broken to whole. And as the stars emerged one by one over Iron Ridge Ranch, Evelyn Vale, formerly Evelyn Mercer, formerly nobody important, formerly just another woman the world had decided didn't matter, smiled at the man beside her and thought about how far she'd come. Not in miles, though those had been considerable, but in courage, in strength, in the unwavering belief that survival wasn't enough, that life demanded more than just breathing, that home was something you built instead of something you found, that love could grow in the most unlikely places if you were brave enough to let it. The wooden spoon she'd carried into these mountains sat on a shelf in the kitchen now, retired but honored. A reminder of where she'd started and how far she'd traveled. But she didn't need reminders anymore. She could feel it in every breath, every moment, every day she woke up at Iron Ridge Ranch surrounded by family and purpose and love. She'd survived. More than that, she'd thrived. And that, in the end, was the greatest victory of all. The woman who'd arrived with nothing had become everything this place needed, and the frozen mountain ranch that had been slowly dying had become a home full of life and warmth and hope for the future. Together, they'd built something that would last, something worth fighting for, something worth living for. And as the night settled over the valley and the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, Evelyn and Rowan Vale sat together on their porch, hands clasped, hearts full, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. Because they'd faced the worst and survived. And now, finally, they could face the best with equal courage. The woman with the wooden spoon had found her place, and she would never be invisible again.